Welcome to the August 22nd, 2011 special called work session. Work sessions are a more informal setting to update the council on business items. No vote will be taken on work session items. Tonight is one agenda item. Public comment is allowed that is germane to an agenda item. If you wish to speak, you are required to fill out a public comment card and turn it in to the city clerk staff. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. Public comment will be heard at the beginning of each item. Once an item is called, no other public cards will be accepted. Sudi, is there any public comment?
No, sir.
Okay. Then I'm going to ask you to call the first item.
First item is City of Milton Budget Workshop, presentation of revenues and expenditures, capital improvement, project prioritization. Ms. Stacy Inglis.
Want to start? Let me start with a couple of things.
And if you don't mind, if I could say something too.
Sure.
Just, we've briefly gone over this, and I think Chris is more worried about it than he should be because it's actually, we're in a real good situation, and there's no surprises or no cuts that, anybody's going to, only positive things. So with that, I'll let you go on.
Positive.
No, that's right.
It's your job.
Sometimes it looks too good. You're like, wait a minute.
It almost looks too good to be true, and that
My grandmother used to say, you know what, somebody's got to do some worrying.
there you go. So I'll tell you tonight. I think your first shot at looking at the budget, I hope is helpful to you. I hope you see good things. But I'll also say that this is the first time you've seen it, so I don't anticipate we're going to get every question answered tonight. I do, though, hope that we give enough of a presentation, you at least know our thought process in putting this thing together. You'll have several other opportunities to talk about the budget. It obviously still has public hearings scheduled that goes through first and second presentation. There's still another opportunity at a work session for it to exist there. Let me tell you that you're not going to hear us tonight speaking through the speakers because the speakers are turned off, although these microphones are capturing what we're saying for the purpose of people that might be watching at home or the taping of this. So if you don't hear yourself tonight in the feedback, that's okay. We are being recorded, right, Dave?
I'm listening to it right now.
All right, good. Sounds good. Budget time is back upon us. As you know, we have to have a budget approved by October the 1st. We're also required to produce a balanced budget, and this budget, as the mayor said, is balanced. I'd kind of like to take a little bit of time and walk you through maybe where we've been over the last 45 days, let you understand some of the struggles that we faced in coming up with a plan to propose to you, and then some of our rationale for how the document as it exists today came into being. And then, we're happy to take questions tonight, take questions after tonight, whatever works for you. We put the budget together. The first thing we did is look at where we anticipated revenues to be, partly because we know that we're in an economy that has some decline in it. We know that when we get tax digests, we have digests that don't allow for increasing property values. And to get to the punchline, we estimate revenues to be right at $17,390,380. That is down over last year, but not too terribly much. So I almost consider it relatively flat over last year. There's certainly no increase in it over last year, but there's also not a substantial decrease, as many governments are facing decreases in a lot of the revenue streams that they have no control over. Once we went through the process of looking at where revenues were, we worked as a team and as a city staff and the department heads to formulate a maintenance and operating budget. The maintenance and operating budget is that portion of the budget that just maintains the status quo for us to continue doing tomorrow what we do today. Where does that part of the budget put us? After seeing those responses from the department heads and after meeting with departments individually one-on-one, we brought some of the expenses in line, and I also asked the departments to look at how they would recommend, if we were faced with it, what they would recommend 5%, 7%, and 10% decreases in that budget would look like. Not that necessarily we went and just said, okay, we're going to pick 7%, so we're going to just take 7% across the board. I don't think that those ever work. The notion of going to the department and asking them to help out some was simply that they, in their departments, know where the pain can feel less painful, I guess, than that I might know on every little detail. So we asked them to look at 5, 7, and 10% reductions. I also come to you tonight just with some of the facts, and these are some of the facts that we just don't know yet where they will ultimately end up. But initially, we have seen healthcare come in at 26%, an increase over last year. I don't get it. Our Human Resource Department doesn't get it. Our insurance broker doesn't get it, because when you look at what we paid in premiums versus what we had in actual claims, it would appear to us as though the insurance company would have a very minor increase, if any. So that might be also just part of the process where they have to throw a first number out to see what you come back with. I mean, it's very common in the business to go back to bid and see if you can find lower prices somewhere else. And that process is ongoing. Our 26% is down to 21% on its first pass-through. I anticipate it to come down even further, but I bring that up simply because this budget is constrained and balanced, anticipating that 26% increase in fact occurs. So it's a very conservative budget, although there's also dental coverage is up 8%. So we've got this thing budgeted so that there's it's within the framework of where we exist today. And I fully believe that when those numbers finally come in, there will be some reduction as well. We looked at the capital request from the departments for the city, and that was a capital request for the new fiscal year. And at the beginning, we had roughly $4.5 million worth of capital requests come in from the department. We looked at maintenance and operating initiatives, being those things that could enhance the level of service of the city of Milton for the next year. Those were in at $1.9 million. And then we crunched all this stuff together to give ourselves this picture of what we had to work from. And it turned out that we had a gap to close between the capital request, general operating budget, operating initiatives of about $4.5 million. Gap wasn't necessarily as big as what $4.5 million makes it sound like. There were some things that were put in as initiatives that more or less were getting some concepts and ideas on the table that never anticipated funding in this fiscal year, just to start to work through the mindset of what would that look like if we had done that at some point. So even though that number seems like $4.5 million is a big number, there were a lot of big ticket items that we really didn't anticipate funding in the first place, and they were able to come off the list. We've got, I guess we can figure out exactly how we want to walk through this. Let me tell you kind of some of the priorities we used in putting together this budget, just so you have a snapshot into the mindset that we were in as we were making decisions. Number one, obviously, is that we want to continue a high level of service and continue doing well what we already do well. We want to maintain our existing assets and infrastructure. We've focused on adhering to the new strategic items in our strategic plan, the strategic action items, where new initiatives, capital requests are tied back to a specific part of the strategic plan. You'll see that in your budget document as you move forward. We wanted to really look in detail at our fund balance, and we'll have a good discussion about that here in a couple of minutes. We wanted to see if there were one-time capital projects that were appropriate to be funded out of the accumulated fund balance that we have had over the last 4 years in managing a pretty tight ship. We looked at anticipating future events and what going through the local option sales tax renegotiation means for us this year, as well as some of the things that have changed in the insurance premium tax. So we've tried to forecast some future events. We have looked at, we want to make sure we always fully fund where we can existing assets, and you will see this budget represents a fully funded police and fire vehicle replacement reserve for this fiscal year. We wanted to forecast fuel needs and consumption based on actual information, and we went out and really researched to figure out that we were not just taking a snapshot of what's on the pump today and hoping that it holds for a year. I mean, fuel is a main part of our business. The fire department uses fuel, the police department uses fuel, the police department uses more fuel than the fire department. That's probably because we have such a big city, and anytime you go somewhere, you burn gas. So we wanted to make sure that we hit that projection as close as we could, at least as close as we could document that we could at this point.
Should we expect prices of the pump to go down or up?
I can tell you exactly what I got in the dollar figures, but I want to say there was even a minor indication downward. I'll answer that for you in detail before we leave. I've got Matt Marietta did the analysis, so
I heard on the news right before I came over here that Gaddafi gets out of power and good after 4 cents, so I got really excited.
I just know I made the campaign problem, so during my term, we lowered gas.
I've already figured out where I'm going to spend that.
No, I just have some general. Does it look like at least they'll stabilize or go down?
Here it says, well, $3.65 a gallon is what we budgeted for based on.
So depending if you go to Sam's or Kroger.
Well, we buy it. Yeah, no, we don't buy it at pump prices. We buy it with. So that must have been diesel. I'll get you a better answer.
Oh, no, that's just in general.
But I want to say there was a slight tick down.
Okay, good. That affects everybody.
Obviously, we wanted to recognize the value of each dollar. That's something that I think it goes without saying that we should recognize that each dollar is important, but sometimes when you put that in your mindset, you should go into a budget process and say, you know, even if this takes out, even if this reduces $100, those $100 are just as important as that $100,000. And then I also wanted to highlight that one of our priorities that we look at is recognizing that we're going to talk about some enhancements to some departments tonight, but also recognizing that the current people that work for the city are very important to us. And that, you know, the staff of this good city is the one that wears the face of the city every day of the week. It wears our faces at 2 o'clock in the morning and at 3 o'clock in the morning. So I want to recognize that we, you know, looked more than just at what do we potentially need to do this year as by way of enhancements, but what do we need to do to make sure that we are still a strong employer of good people. Then we went through what I called the Balancing Act of 2012. Stacy chuckled when I wrote that on my sheet that day. And, you know, largely what we did to start with was to eliminate the some of the initiatives that just simply didn't match this year's priorities or our perception of what the priorities are this year. You all might change my mind on that as we go through this budget process, but I think I've captured it. We're going after an aggressive pursuit of decreasing our benefit costs. I mentioned the health care thing. We did elect, rather than just to take their first reduction, we did elect to go back to the market again in a competitive bid, even if we move away from United Healthcare, to find somebody with health care costs less than the 21% that United is at today. So that is ongoing, and we probably won't have an answer, just in the spirit of telling you where we are, that we probably won't have a definitive answer until 14 days or so from now. So.
But prior to us finalizing the budget.
Oh, yes,
No, the
absolutely.
actual number thing.
We had a real serious internal discussion on.
Let me,
go ahead.
but the good thing is, with the number you've got plugged in there, we've got some room. So if it does go down, it's going to be even better.
So what you got plugged in there is worst case scenario.
That's right. And then we had this discussion on what was appropriate to do with the fund balance and whether or not it was appropriate to look at a couple of one-time expenditures this year that would enhance transportation, very honestly, and whether this was the right year to do that. My answer to that is I believe it is. I believe that we have a very healthy fund balance. We have a fund balance that is somewhere in the neighborhood of $7.8 million. As we work through this budget process, you will see that I'm going to make a recommendation that we do a couple of capital projects, but that at the end of the day, we still maintain a fund balance in excess of $6 million, which is roughly 2.5 times
What we're supposed to.
the required reserve that the city's required to have. So I don't want this to turn into a discussion. I want to say that at the very beginning. I don't want this to turn into a discussion that we are spending, that I might propose to you that we spend into the fund balance to do budget balancing, because that's not what this is. This is the fact that I recognize that our fund balance is strong and we're in a strong financial position. I think this is the right year to take a couple of one-time capital projects off the shelf and actually get some work done out there in the field.
And also, these are items that, you know, at the forefront of all of our citizens is infrastructure and road improvements. So.
What was the remaining that you expected? 6 point what?
6 plus. I'm saying plus or minus 6.2. It might even be a little bit stronger than that, but to give you a conservative number, we're required, just to give you a benchmark, we're required to maintain roughly $2.7 million. So it still leaves us, even if we elect to make the decision to do some of these capital projects this year, we still remain in a very healthy financial position. Some of the budget highlights, just before I get into it specifically, is I do believe it supports the strategic plan that we worked through and adopted, very specifically noted in several places. It addresses some of the critical needs that we need to address in infrastructure maintenance. Recognizes the efforts that we have put into place over the last 4 years as a team, as this whole group sitting here have put together to maintain ourselves in a place of financial stability in an environment that doesn't always lend government towards having that luxury. And I think it's time that we've done that well enough that we should have the ability to do some good things in the city this year and not lose that position. That's the important part, is not lose that position. You're going to see this budget, but it adds to and enhances something that's near and dear to my heart, something I think is near and dear to each of your heart, and that's one of our core functions, and that's the safety of our community. It's time we address that. It's time we look at our staffing levels in our police department, particularly based on current real data, and we have that data, and this budget will start to address. I can't say that it totally addresses, but it will start to address alleviating some of that, some of that we need to do there. This budget improves and maintains our infrastructure. It implements strategies that builds relationships. That was one of the big things in the strategic plan, and you'll see that as we go through there. There are several mechanisms by which we think we can reach out to and communicate with citizens that otherwise aren't communicated with today. And Jason's got some good ideas as to what that looks like. And very honestly, in the last several years, and this has been a healthy exercise for us as we decided what was the right course for Milton, we have shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And I commented, last year we did away with even providing coffee at City Hall. And I commented in the hallway at one point, I said, I don't even have a coffee to give back this year because the coffee's already gone. So we truly have run a lean operation. I think that's going to come through in this budget. And that's good. That was where we needed to go. We didn't need to all of a sudden transition away from CH and all of a sudden run big government, because that's not, I think, the desire of anybody in this room. What I've recognized is that we have shrunk, and whereas we don't have many additional needs than we had when we transitioned, there are some. If we're going to continue to match the level of expectation, we're going to have to seriously look at where we can provide some additional brain power to a couple of different projects. What did I say there? I don't know what I was saying. So without further ado, that was the last bullet point. It didn't make any sense to me right now, so I'm just going to move away from it. It'll make sense to me tomorrow.
Well, I took that to mean that under CH we had a reserve of experts, and evidently you're saying that for certain projects we may need to get that reserve somehow that we don't currently have on staff.
No, I don't know that that's necessarily what what I'm saying right now is we have a very small staff doing a whole lot of things. And as we continue to want to continue to do bigger things, I mean, if we're satisfied that the status quo is acceptable, then we probably are right-sized for the deliverable that we're producing. It would be hard to decide that we want to do 10 new things this year within the current allocation that we have. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions thus far? Done a lot of talking.
Not doing good.
Good summary.
All right. So there's the summary. I can certainly do this at your pleasure. We can go through the maintenance and operating budget, and we can do the budget game where we look at lines and you ask questions, and I'll tell you how we got to that number. I think we have a note for just about every line. I'm okay too saying, gosh, sometime in the next couple of weeks, go through the first part of this book, which is basically the status quo part, and I'll get you questions if I have them. Let's get into talking about the capital projects and the initiatives, and I can do whatever you all want to do.
I might suggest that, do a brief overview and everybody get a taste of it. Talk about some of the capital improvements and anything that's different from last year's budget. And then, give folks some time to really look through for a couple of weeks and whatnot. Does that make sense for the council? Okay.
So if you want to meet me on this budget summary page, then it's right after the tab that says revenue.
You right before.
To the revenues page, it's after the revenues tab.
So the city of Milton revenues?
Yes.
That's what you're
Budget summary.
Okay.
You can see there we have, again, as with prior budgets, and you've heard me say this before in budget time, we like to estimate revenues conservatively and spending probably more liberally, and that's what ends up with a budget that balances that you could almost guarantee will balance at the end of the year. You can see there are the couple of key ones to highlight are current year property taxes, which are down slightly over last year, roughly $200,000. You can see that with the exception of a little bit of an uptick in local option sales tax, that the revenue lines generally are about flat over last year. We keep talking about what does this local option sales tax renegotiation in this year mean to the city of Milton. I can't sit here tonight and tell you I have a crystal ball and know exactly what it means, but I can tell you that there are multiple ways of distributing that sales tax revenue across the county. At some point between now and July 1st of next year, the county commission chair will call for the negotiations to officially commence. We'll then be in a negotiation process for 60 days. If we're unable to reach agreement, we'll go to mediation for 60 days. And if that's not successful, we're into the Superior Court within the 30-day window. So there's a start and a stop to when that local option sales tax renegotiation process takes place. And at this point, we are not in the driver's seat. The county commission chair is. After July the 1st of 2012, if Chairman Eves fails to act, then any of the affected mayors in Fulton County can act on his behalf. So we're well positioned to go through and start that process. To give you some idea, and there's, again, a host of ways that this could be distributed, so I don't want you to take this to the bank, per se. But if the local option sales tax were to be distributed in the same fashion in which it's distributed today, that would equate in the next fiscal year, partial fiscal year, January 2013, of an addition to Milton's budget of somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.5 million. Of course, that may be, I got to give that disclaimer because we're not at the negotiation table. It hasn't even started yet. So, but I would hope that you would have us at least understand the process, and that's what the process is saying.
So, Chris, when you say that, right now it's distributed based on population density.
15.6.
From the old.
Right.
And so it should double.
The uptick is based on the new census data, pointing to the fact that we're at 33,000 or whatever.
And that's what triggers loss renegotiation.
Okay. All right.
And the hope would be that we can negotiate even more positively, so we can have growth not just in population, but also in a positive negotiation.
Right. There's about 15 people at the table who each have, the unfortunate part about it is that those which gain didn't mean that's because there's more money in the system. It means that there are going to be those that give too. So, it'll be one of those, we'll have to be real strategic in our position.
So what other factors enter into it other than population?
There's a bunch of different ways because there's
tried that.
actually, you have to negotiate in conformance with one of seven different bullets that's in the state law. There are some that would argue that it should be distributed more based on a point of sale type operation, which means it could be potentially attached to the tax digest and distributed that way versus population. We'll have, once we get ready to go through the negotiations, we'll have a better perspective. And I don't too want to go out real far tonight on where my strategic position is with respect to that, because I've got a place that I think is good to advocate from for our city.
Do you have are you comfortable giving a worst and a best case scenario? Or is this
I think
your
I
worst
will.
case scenario?
The worst in all of the, yes. Yes.
The worst is zero, Chris.
The worst is the 3.5 million.
There is a worst, but I don't want to say what it is because I don't want somebody to figure it out.
Chris, in 2011, we estimated $3.54 million in sales tax, and it looks like we're behind by about $800K or so. And the projection for next year's budget is just slightly up from that, so.
Where do we anticipate the last 3 months? Stacy just pulled it
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask. The actual numbers are just actual to date, correct? So they're
Right.
not really,
Yeah, it goes, if we collect exactly what we had last year, we'll be $100,000 over what we projected at
We're on
3.5
a-
million.
We're on a trend to
Oh,
close
so
up
that,
this year.
so that shortfall is projected to be made up in the last 3 months?
yeah, because it's
Right.
only paid quarterly.
Yeah, because you've
Okay.
got school.
Okay, yeah.
that-
If we trend flat over last year, we'll surpass the number by 100,000.
Do we
So the-
have, just to help us going forward for next year, do we have anything that shows what are realistically we expect the numbers at the end of this year to be? And are there gonna, I'm sure we're gonna be having to make some kind of budget amendments for this year's budget. Do we know what those are going to be yet?
Or what's your question?
What kind of budget adjustments we're gonna need to make for this year, and do we have any idea? Because these are the actual just to date. That really doesn't help us because, I mean, like, it shows us receiving no property tax revenue because we hadn't built it yet. But
That's right.
yeah, so it's kind of hard to look at it and compare one year to the next when you really don't know what we realistically expect
This
for
year to
this current
close
year to
at?
be.
I expect it to be a little over 18 million that we collect in total for revenues.
And it is budgeted at,
Budgeted at 17.4.
We expect actually to be above.
so we expect to be able to add some additional amount to our fund balance at the end of this fiscal year.
That's correct.
So on all of these actuals, is that through, what, 30 June?
Yes, for the most part.
And that might be helpful at some point, just as we go through this process, even to have an additional column added that would, if you would so want. I mean, we don't, if nothing else, just for a point of discussion, as Karen was just saying, that would be helpful to kind of give us a sense of what do we expect to gain, if we will gain or lose, but what would be that net between now and the fourth quarter. That'd be helpful.
So at 2.7 million, then, if that's 3 quarters, we could expect another 900,000 if it holds on the same curve.
Okay.
Hence your recommendation to use some of that fund balance.
Yeah.
Because we've just been taking it every single year and building up this fund balance with our excessive revenues over expenditures. At some time, we've got to say, is that the best use of our citizens' money just to have it sitting there when we know that there are capital projects that would benefit them?
I don't think any of our citizens would
Hence the
argue with
budget
those
that's coming to
capital,
you.
those capital projects.
It's been good to be in a position of fiscal conservatism. It's a good thing.
Okay, any additional questions? I kind of highlighted the biggest revenue streams, and the others, we can talk about franchise fees, local option sales tax, and property tax, and that really is the biggest of the lines.
When do we receive the insurance premium tax? 'Cause I know it's just one check once a year,
October.
October.
A quick question on the
We will
franchise.
never forget that again.
Never.
No, we won't.
And the franchise fees, from a collection perspective, and I know that as we went through that process of waste haulers and others that provide that, do we feel like we're collecting that now pretty consistently?
Yeah, we are roughly like 1%. Well, no, that was just 1 month. We're pretty much on target. Actually, we are over what we collected last year.
And we believe that we're collecting that from all of the entities that we should be.
For franchise, yes.
What are activity fees under charges for services?
Those are the camp fees. We actually split those out. Instead of having all of the camp fees roll up into activity fees, we wanted to show them separately. So you see that there's no budget. Right. There's no budget line for those other.
That's helpful.
We're gonna split
Okay.
out.
And that 17.5 for Bethel was just obviously for those first couple of months.
That was yes. 17,686 is the revenues from this year's summer camp.
Wow.
And we do plan on carrying that forth for next year as well.
Yes.
So there's no worries in terms of revenue between now? I mean, we're gonna be up $1 million by the end of the year, you're saying, over our projection. So there's really not any worry in terms of our revenue number coming in.
Overall, no.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's many cities that can say that. Let's just say amen.
Just knock on wood. We'll knock on wood. Alan? Jerry?
Thanks, sir. Can you remind me again, I remember when the tax commissioner was here, 3% reduction in the tax digest
It
for
was
this?
4.64%.
4.62, and compared to the rest of Fulton County or surrounding areas, do we have those numbers?
I don't have those numbers. I can get those numbers if you'd like me to.
No,
I've heard from other city managers as big as 12% in some places,
Yeah.
but we can get you something more official. Okay. We'll flip over to Mayor and Council column. We'll go through this one real quick just because I budgeted for you. And yeah, it's a little tiny, but the one thing I did this year, and I guess as we were going through the 3, 5, and 7%, 5, 7, and 10% reduction thing is, I was tasked with looking at your maintenance and operating budget, and the one place that we have always budgeted really, really, really strong, and very few of you ever use, is this mayor and council stipend. Some of you use it for cell phones and air cards and that kind of thing, and that's what it's intended for, and that's very appropriate. But I've never had anybody go so high as the 2720 that was budgeted, and I'm wondering if there was any flexibility there. If y'all want me to leave it at 2720, I can. If y'all are comfortable with that coming down to 2,000, I don't really know that that's necessarily going to impact any of you, because as I've looked over a trend, nobody's risen to that level yet. So, you know, to bring that down may be a possibility. Completely up to you.
Fine with me.
Might bring it down to the 2,000 or even further.
Just, I mean, right now it's at 2,000. And maybe we go at a year at 2,000, and then if we can come down even more, maybe we try it for a year
Try to
and
track it down.
track it.
Maybe if you want to do it on an individual basis, you can take mine to 0.
Let's take mine too.
I'd be interested to know where the $137 came on mine.
Air card.
The what?
The
Air card.
power that
This?
we just had to have a place to book
Well, I
it,
didn't
too.
know there was going to be a cost associated with
Oh,
this.
yeah.
I'm going to have to give it back now.
Nothing's free.
Okay, I feel much better.
That was a good lunch.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so if we don't have any objection to that $2,000, everything else that you all historically have done is budgeted here, being the travel and the training that you're required to have, both at the annual conference, typically in Savannah, as well as Mayor's Day in Atlanta, if you choose to attend that. There's really not anything that's grossly different in your budget this year than there has been in the past.
I see we're planning for a retreat.
Yes, we are planning for, and I've got something planned for that I hope comes together right after the first of the year, and I think you're going to be thrilled if I can make it happen.
Says Atlantis.
Overseas.
No, it'll be local, but
For $2,000.
the facilitation that I'm working on is something really special for city government. So if I can make it work, I'm going to try to make it work. Anything else? that you spot in
The supplies are Diet Coke and a candy budget for the,
Pass it around. Somebody seems to
And
want
there's
it.
just other, I mean, there's just other
training
stuff.
table.
You know, there's just your business cards and, you know, nameplates or pins. Or, you know, there's just supplies that happen in the course of operating that we've got to have a place to attach them to. Okay. This is going to be a story that tells, as we go through pretty consistently, that we go through these departments now. And it's really in our estimation, a bare bones proposal to continue to operate the status quo. Recognizing again throughout that the benefit costs will likely, as we move through this, come down. Several of these departments, particularly the clerk, you can scan it real quick. Their annual maintenance requirements for some of the software that we have, as well as some of the mandatory training and advertising and that covers the advertising of things in the newspaper for the purpose of being able to have special called meetings, and that's the kind of stuff that this does. There's nothing in here that rises to the level of really anything new or different than this year. Passing the candy.
What's the flexible spending?
That's a benefit.
Cafeteria plan?
Yeah, it's FSA. If they choose not to participate in the group insurance, then we give them a flexible spending amount.
So that's been eliminated? in
No,
2000?
what happens is I normally just budget everything in the group insurance as though we anticipate that all the employees are going to participate in the group insurance plan. And at mid-year, if chosen to do the flexible spending or opt out of the group insurance plan, then I do a budget adjustment and pull it out of group insurance and put it into the flexible spending account.
All right.
Okay. Love to say that I had something unique and crazy in mind. I did budget some dollars for a staff retreat this year. I think it's important that as the council continues to develop and the staff needs to continue to develop as well. And I might even, for the first time since we've done staff retreats, non-council retreats, I might, and if it all works the way I'm hoping it's going to work, I'm going to find a way that maybe we can do a council staff retreat for the first time, as opposed to keeping them two individual things. I don't know that that's necessarily going to be successful at this point, but everything is looking good. And I think there's some value in getting those two teams together to become one team. I'd like to, at this point, and I mentioned it last year when you all were supportive of my attendance in Leadership ICMA, I want to tell you that the costs have come down for that slightly this year, and I appreciate your continued support there. I can tell you that some good connections of Milton to the rest of the nation have occurred as a product of that. And other than that, absent some supplies, and occasionally if we have to host a lunch here at City Hall, that's really the end of that budget. We move into general administration. This is basically the catch-all to make sure that we have, pencils, and we don't need to know how many of those we need, I guess, a year, but paper and paper clips and the stuff that just keeps, these documents being presented. You know what general supplies are. I don't have to go into a whole lot of detail. If anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
What vehicles, repairs and maintenance are included in this budget?
The pool car that we have, which can be used by any department. It's a little Ford Fusion that is used by ComDev and Parks and whoever needs to go around Milton from here. As is that supplies gasoline and diesel line. That's the last one down.
So is postage primarily tied to when we mail out tax bills? So we're not doing the calendar any longer.
This is general postage for all of City Hall. The tax bills is strictly in the finance budget.
$6,500 just strikes me as a lot of postage. Because I know we're not doing the calendar anymore. I'm trying to think of what things we typically.
It comes typically. Sudi's the one that orders the postage. Is there any trend that you've seen as you've?
It comes from community development.
Community development.
When you're doing it for
HOA zoning, yeah.
I guess I was just
right.
thinking that would come out of zoning specifically. That's why.
It's out of one general fund.
If you'll see that I've actually requested an initiative for postage machine and an insert folder. But the postage machine will give us the ability to be able to track everything by department, and so next year I hope to be able to split everything out
You
by
can add, so right now, everything comes out of this general fund?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Other than property tax
Other than
bills.
property tax.
Okay. All the zoning, all of that comes out of that general fund. Thank you.
And are the property tax bills done bulk mail, or they?
Okay, if we flip over to finance. The professional fees deal really with required things. You can see that we budgeted for a financial advisor in this year, and I think that's appropriate after the presentation we had just a couple of weeks ago at work session. Printing of property tax bills, the required continued participation in some professional education and certification that goes along with the, it's appropriate for the position. And some general supplies.
Why did the printing of the property tax bills, it went down pretty significantly?
Because the previous year was printed and paid for in fiscal year 10,
Okay.
and so was the fiscal year 9. I mean, because
So
of
it
that late
doubled up
billing,
then.
it was doubled up in 10, yeah.
So we're-
I'm so sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. We're not incurring any additional costs in property tax bills as a result of Fulton County's miscue, are we?
No.
Just on the financial advisor, obviously we had a great presentation with regards to that. I'm assuming that that's a market rate, and if we looked at that relative to other providers, or is that a singular provider?
No, that's
specific
that's just a
provider?
budgeted dollar figure. We'll go
Chopped out,
RFQ. Yeah, we'll go RFQ in that process.
So in theory, that could be less.
That's right.
Okay.
Now, the credit card fees, I know that's something we have discussed in the past. Have we looked into any other ways that, people could
I
pay
have, and
themselves?
actually, I plan on bringing that forward to council very, very soon. I've been concentrating so much on the budget. We just now are about to roll out the online payment system. With that, there is a $5 charge that Tyler Technologies charges to the property taxpayers. And I anticipate on charging something on top of that to help cover our cost of the merchant fees. We are allowed to do that for online payments only.
Right, because I know Fulton County does it. Also, everybody pay their property tax bills online and get a lot of different fire points.
Yeah. And I have done some research
Thought
on
of it
that.
that way.
Oh, you hadn't thought of it that way?
It's all about the frequent flyer points.
Yeah.
You can say you're
I mean,
paying your
just think
taxes,
about it.
but you get to go on a great trip.
And that could factor into our overseas retreat.
I mean, I have had clients who asked about paying their income taxes online just for the frequent flyer points, but it's a 2 or 3% charge, and they decide maybe that's not quite worth it. But
All about the points.
So do we think that online capability would be available this year, or it'll be
Yeah.
next fiscal? Yes.
It'll be this year,
Wonderful.
yes. I think I was waiting on one little piece, and I got that the other day from Dave. It was setting up an email just for property taxes. And so, since Jason's on vacation this week, I decided just to give him a reprieve.
I think that'll be
So
terrific.
I'll get him next week and go ahead and roll that out.
Thank you.
Move over to legal real quick. It's a pretty quick one. You can see where we are as of June 30, 11. I'm at $130,000 in a budget of $240,000. I've brought that down in 2012 to $220,000. Again, that's kind of a issue-driven line item, and we can control that to some extent. I stopped a long time ago saying, gosh, our legal bill would have been X, but for Y. And I realized there's always a Y. So, it was hard to, wait on that magic moment when there's nothing going on but general legal stuff. So I think that's an okay number. Our attorney tells me he can work within that number. And obviously we scrutinize that time and those invoices. invoices very closely.
Not that I want Ken to start billing us a lot for the remaining months, but it seems like we're trending very positively there.
Yes.
If we keep trending, what do we expect for year end?
Oh, I don't know, add on the outside, add 45 to that number.
Let's just say Ken keeps complaining about having to eat ramen noodles and stuff.
He's getting skin.
And you know what?
Maybe 36.
Even up.
You know, we average a monthly bill between $12,000 and $15,000. So
It used to be a lot more, so really a lot of thanks goes to those sitting at this table, both from staff side and our side, for keeping it down.
And now we have some opportunities to, for some of these legal bills, to collect on some of these court cases.
we can seek to be reimbursed fees. Yes, on some of them.
Some of them.
And some of them, GERMA will take care of.
That's correct. Yep. Okay, into the wonderful world of IT. What you will see in IT is a lot of just recurring, either annual license fees or recurring connection fees, whether that's the data line that we need between this building and the Public Safety Dispatch Center. That's a summary, in essence, of what this budget entails. You will see that we anticipate maintaining the same IGA that we have with the City of Johns Creek for this fiscal year, and that's why you'll see that there are lines that are up there in the salary and wages section. You can see it's captured lower in the document under the title IGA Johns Creek.
And our Barracuda message maintenance is included in that now, since we have no budget for it. Or
Looks as though that was, and typically when you see that, is that was something that was funded, the total project cost was complete in 2011, and there must not be an annual maintenance. Some of these lines over time will fall off if they were Barracuda.
Please don't break into song, Chris. Come on.
The thing that keeps you from getting spammed.
yeah, my Barracuda file at work gets quite full.
Looks like it's out.
Okay. Takes here a little bit of a look through this. Human resources. This was another one that when I asked for the 5, 7, and 10, wow, I don't even know where to start, because some of these things we just need to do. Obviously the professional fees that go along with employing people, we need to have some ability to advertise in the event of a vacancy. We need to have, for some, employee development. You can see in human resources this year is where we have budgeted employee training on kind of a citywide basis, meaning that somebody in a certain department, absent police and fire, who have their other required training needs, there's some training dollars for professional development for those that otherwise might not be budgeted for in a specific department. General supplies. Sam brought up an initiative of, now that we've been around long enough, to have some type of recognition of length of service. To support that incentive for employees to remain with us. Questions? Moving on to risk management is the assortment of insurance policies that we have. There's nothing new or shocking there other than the last line, which is pollution insurance. That was something that is recommended. It's one of the things that our attorney recommended that we carry, simply because if we ever have any type of a pollution or hazardous material incident in Milton, those events become very, very, very expensive very, very, very quickly. And on a comparison scale, when we looked at what the premium was versus what the potential exposure of was one that was probably well spent. There's probably another reason why this is in here that we'll talk about at a later date.
How much coverage are you looking at then for a $26,000 premium?
I can get you a copy of exactly what's covered in it.
I can
Have
imagine
we
what that
actually-
might need to cover.
But, I'm sorry?
Have we actually gone out for proposals on this coverage?
Is that just a budget?
Yes.
Or is it just,
Sam, are you sitting behind me?
Yeah, and I'm not sure I heard all of it about going out to bid on pollution coverage from Rhonda.
Right.
It was an add-on that GERMA offered us
Okay.
as part of when we had renewal in May. And through some discussions, we opted to take that policy as well.
how much coverage is there?
I'm not exactly sure. I think it's just an add-on to our current, which has a $1 million top end. But I'm not 100% certain of that. I'm still trying to get hold of the actual policy for that and what's covered. I had several emails that gave me some general descriptions, but I want to see the final documents still.
Yeah, I'd like to see it. Seems like a pretty steep premium for $1 million coverage.
Well, let's get back with you on it. There's another reason this is in. Sure.
And the add-on, was that actually put in place in May, or that was just the option that became available?
The option became available and it went into effect.
So it's currently in place, and that's just a function of whether or not we decide to continue with that.
That's right.
Thank you.
Silva has his own insurance policy,
He does.
maybe worth more than I am.
Okay. We elected to create general government's building. This year, this will be new over last year. To cover the facilities that we continue to keep power on, et cetera. This is where the rental payment will come from for City Hall. It just captures it rather than in a specific department's budget. It captures it in just general government buildings because it's hard to say that all of the rent for this building should be to, pick who you tie it to. Is it the mayor and council's because they've signed the, paperwork, or is it mine, or so it's here now. This is where you can look for those types of things.
Can you remind me when our lease will expire for this building?
September 30th, 2012.
What year? Did you say September?
September 30th, 2012.
So this number may change for the next year's budget.
It may. Yes, it may. But that number is good through this budget because this budget actually ends on September the 30th, 2012. We've got public information and communications here, which is the department that Jason runs. Nothing really shocking there. More maintenance than anything else.
And here again, the difference between the actuals 2009, 2010.
That's when
Okay.
we had the CH contract.
Talking about the contracted $500,000?
Right.
Right. That would have been the portion of the contract that was attributed to communication.
That you know.
But
Or did
all
you-
I could take was total head count and divide the, because I couldn't, it was proprietary. Didn't know. I don't, it better not have cost that number.
They were getting ripped off of it.
They were.
Jason does an excellent job, so every time I turn on the channel 2, Milton's on it.
Municipal court is another fairly straightforward one. There are translator needs, court-appointed attorney needs. In the event that we would need a substitute judge or a substitute solicitor, although this year neither of those have happened because of the staffing that we have, they figured out a way to make it work. In the event of a conflict or in the event of simply both of them are being out of town at the same time, we keep a little bit of money in there so that we can pay a per session fee in the possibility that occurs. There are certain levels of training that both court clerks and judges are required to get, and that's budgeted in here. We've brought down books and periodicals simply now because a lot of the law books, law documents that they use are available online. Questions on that?
Do we regularly use both of our judges?
No.
Judge Zimmerman handles just about all of the court cases. Occasionally we'll need Judge Hansford. Need Judge Hansford even probably more when Judge Zimmerman has conflict, meaning that somebody appears before this court that he's represented somewhere else because he's not a full-time judge. He has his own law practice. Occasionally he'll run into a conflict where he just can't hear a case.
Where did you say the law books were? What line item?
There was some law stuff down in books and periodicals down under supplies.
Uh-huh. But we never furnished a complete law library, did we?
No, nor should we need to,
Right.
because they're all now online. A former city manager in the building liked to have paper, which is why you'll see those books in my office, but I've ceased the updates to them because they're just as expensive as the books themselves. So I can function very well on a computer as well. So I've tried to stop those costs where I could, but we still do have a set of books in the building.
Right.
I wouldn't rely upon them though, because they don't have the
Outdated.
updates.
Yeah.
Getting into the police budget. I can either let you scan this and let you throw questions out.
Just tell them what's different.
There's not a whole lot different.
So less than $200,000 uptick.
Vehicle repair and maintenance probably eats up, as Stacy's whispering in my ear, probably eats up the majority of it. As you know now, most of our cars are no longer under warranty. You can see the fuel eats up probably the balance of it.
It looks like pension amounts on all of these are going up pretty significantly.
And yes, they are. Although, as you remember from the presentation, they were anticipated to continue to increase until we got to about the 9% mark where they would level out. So they're not doing anything different than what was presented at that workshop.
Okay. It still seems like a pretty high amount. I think we want to make sure we continue to monitor that, because I mean it's not a single week that we don't hear of some city or county government in trouble because of their underfunded pension.
Right. These numbers represent, fully funded, and they also represent that it is doing exactly what it's not doing anything abnormal here. And I got to tell you, we probably anticipate it'll do this again next year, because as we saw, we anticipate it to go to about that 9% mark and then start to level off. So.
Can you just speak to head count within our police department?
30?
29 sworn.
29 sworn.
29 what?
29 sworn police officers. Current.
And what are we proposing?
Oh, we'll get to that in a minute, but I'm proposing that we add 4.
Right, that just, because it helps just now.
Yes.
Chris, what about the 800 megahertz fees to Fulton County?
They went up.
Big increase.
It did, and that is part of, I guess, kind of the total picture. Remember last year we talked about this thing called UASI, which was the Urban Area Security Initiative, and we budgeted $250,000 in the Capital Projects Fund, because at that point we were going to move forward with a regional type approach where we were going to attach to the Atlanta UASI. Without getting into the too many details of UASI, UASI has entered into a contractual relationship with Fulton County, and for us to pursue attaching to their system, we would have to negotiate with Fulton County. And I don't know that I'm necessarily as strong of a person that says that's a non-starter as a couple of the other North Fulton cities were. There were a couple of cities up here that just said, frankly, if they're involved, we're not. So we have since gone out and explored a second option, which is to connect in potentially with the Cobb County master site, which would serve us fine as well. As a matter of fact, next Monday, the 29th, we're going to have a meeting here to talk the details of it. So what you will see is you'll see some money removed from the Capital Projects Fund, because we don't necessarily need to go that direction at this point. What each city up here is doing is budgeting $400 per radio as attachment fees, where in the prior year we were at 170. And that's as close as we all can get up here at this point, is to be able to do a conservative budget. We anticipate being able to attach to the new system for somewhere in that dollar range.
What are the cameras? So it looked like we had spent some of that this year on cameras that were not previously budgeted.
Cameras in the police department is to start a migration to a camera system that we can actually get parts for. The camera system that we had hit some financial crisis and just no longer is in business. So we need to start transitioning to a camera system that works. And it's not that some of the cameras that we have in the cars don't work, but as far as being able to get replacement parts, when a little on your belt clip microphone thing breaks, we're like going to eBay to try to find a replacement. So that's not the position we want to be in. So this is starting the migration to a system that's actually in business.
We had some cost in this year that was unexpected for that.
Where are you looking?
Bottom to bottom.
Yes. Although we will be able to, through a process of finishing this fiscal year with a budget amendment, we will be able to account for that, right, within the department.
One thing, and there's tuition reimbursement. It's a shame that more folks aren't taking advantage of that. What does this cover 100% reimbursement of courses?
It's a post attendance reimbursement based on performance.
Right.
So it does account. It can account for an employee up to $3,000 a year. And I too wish that line was a lot bigger.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it is what it is. Do what?
You lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink.
Well, is that a function of shift work?
Potentially to some degree. I mean, I remember trying to go to college working a shift, and taking a Monday class every Monday was hard when you only had every other Monday off. So, it does require a more non-traditional style of learning to some degree, whether or not that's online learning or flexibility in adult learning that some of the institutions have. So, no, it's not as easy as being a full-time college student and just saying that's my life for right now. It does takes a
Are
bit of
promotions based on continuing education?
I don't know if either of the department. I know the departments are moving there. Have either of y'all written it in there yet?
I have not written as required. It may be this next go round written as preferred, but I could require it. I wouldn't have staff.
We've started with Georgia State, the Fire Academy, to MPQ, which is a national certification. We just started that in our promotional process for the driver engineer for FAO. So that just occurred. So moving forward, paramedic, and then will be required for lieutenant.
Great.
We are moving.
In that same line of questioning, Chris, how quickly is the reimbursement if they were to decide to take you up on the offer?
At the completion of the course, there's just a series of paperwork they fill out here and submit.
And how long is the courses usually?
Courses are a semester.
See, that could be a barrier too, because they have to put the money in advance.
Up to the cap of $3,000 in a year.
I think what I'm hearing is, and again, this could be discussed later, but, maybe is the system set up to where it's not promoting people to want to do that, whereas, to Alan's point, Bill's point, maybe it's a stretch to come up with $3,000, take the course, get it, and wait 3 months to get paid back. So maybe that's something we could look at. But on the opposite side, I can certainly see where if it's based on performance, and if you were to upfront it and then they didn't pass the class or dropped out or whatever, so that'd be a problem too.
That's right.
But yeah. So, anyways.
Chris, there's thinking back to the ride along that I did with our police department not too long ago. I knew that there was a system that the Fulton County jail had where we were having to enter data twice. We do something when we're at the jail, get somebody put in or locked up, and we have to come back here and we have to enter the same data into our system. And I think you had mentioned something about there's a bridge or a link or some kind of a data sharing option that was available so that the officers wouldn't have to do that job twice. Is that something we're looking at, getting more connected with Fulton County, or?
I think when I was talking about that was the bridge between the departments that exist as a product of our new software implementation, and that we can share potentially through OSSI, we can share with other agencies that are OSSI based. Does that
We recently, and I think it may be since you rose, we got the OSSI module, the bookend module working over at Fulton County. So I don't know if that was the issue you had that night or if it was with electronic ticketing, because even though we got them electronically booking in now, there is still an arrest module here. So if we don't fill out, we're depending on whatever they enter, if it's right or not. So there's all kinds of technology that would make our jobs more efficient. So I'm not sure if it was the booking module, if it was the fact that we have to come back here and do the arrest module. If we don't, we're depending
Well, it
on their
seemed like
history.
we were doing a job here that seemed to be redundant, and it kept the officer out of the car, off his beat, for 30, 45 minutes after an arrest was made. And to me, it just didn't make any sense. It seemed like one of those things, like if we spent whatever money it was to take that away from us, it was actually increasing our productivity, increasing our efficiency in terms of, the officer being available. So I made a mental note to remember to bring that up.
Okay, I'll ask Hickerson. He'll remember specifically when it was. There is another issue that it might have been that between Brooke and I, we worked out where it helps us and it helps her because it was duplication of effort. The officers entered information, the ticket came over here, Brooke entered the information. So we got that worked out between us where we could purchase a system, a module on our records management system that it's going to save them all kinds of time.
Okay.
So I'll ask him specifically what it was and then let you know if it was handled or not.
Okay, sure.
Is our animal control amount set with Fulton County for the next year?
that's what they've sent us as anticipated costs. Of course, it's use-based, so it too is another one that you can forecast based on trend, more so than you can forecast based on reality, because we won't know how often it's used until it's actually used.
Now, who is it that actually picks up the dead deers on the side of the road? Is that part of animal control?
Offset.
It's Offset. You're the dead deer picker-upper, Carter?
Carter, you're a man of many talents.
And as the mayor, I got to say, the majority of calls I get,
A dead deer on the
dead
side
deer,
of
and
the
we
road?
had a couple of dead raccoons, a couple of possums, but mainly dead deer. And Optech's good
Maybe
about
I should call
30 minutes later they got
Come
them.
pick up the squirrels out of my attic.
They have to be dead first.
I can arrange that if I can spot them.
I'm hoping we have something dead in my garage when we get home today, so that's getting into
Dog?
everything. No. No.
All right.
Some kind of rodent.
All right,
Let's
moving
put it
right
on fire.
along.
Kind of
Put it
rodent.
on the fire.
Can I have one last question?
Sure.
On SWAT,
Uh-huh.
requested budget of $4,000, you approved 800. What's our arrangement with Alpharetta?
Where are you? You're in education and training. Our arrangement with Alpharetta is we remain a part of that 2-city SWAT team that as I understand it, is becoming a 3-city SWAT team. Roswell is participating as well. So they are yet to be named. I'm sure it'll be an acronym. I recommended RAM, maybe ARM.
Arm's good.
But I think we are still part of the arrangement, but the arrangement's even getting better because now the 3 cities as a region are coming together.
So obviously not all of the costs are
I saw you take a drink out of that
in
can.
education and training.
I'm sorry?
I say not all of the costs associated with SWAT, or SWAT participation, are in education and training.
Oh, that's correct. That's correct. There would be supplies.
A lot of the cost too is just our particular officers that are trained and the salaries and whatnot, so it wouldn't be broken
So
out.
weaponry. I know they just bought silencers, so now they're silent-handed.
They just bought a big truck.
You know, the drug dealers bought that truck.
Oh, that's right.
That was nice of them.
That's right.
Yeah, so nice of them. 100% the drug dealers funded that truck.
Which truck is that?
The new Alpharetta, the SWAT bus that Alpharetta just bought, so
huge.
that moves them
It
all
is.
around.
$100,000.
Yeah.
Does it pay for the gas? too?
I don't think the drug dealers pay for the gas, but they did buy the
Future
truck.
ones might.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, moving right along.
Okay, let's move on to fire. I'll let you all scan it, see if you see anything that,
How many FTEs do we currently have on staff?
54.
See if anything looks hot.
Do you count me and Alan as half-person units or full, or how does that work?
Y'all are, they
Well,
call,
only counting the guy that got out, right?
they count
I
them
think y'all-
as volunteer firefighters.
Y'all may be a liability rather than an asset.
I'm gonna come back for a second chance when I get in shape.
We'll get to it in a minute, one.
Why is garbage pickup on
I don't know where we're getting to, it just helps me when I look at the numbers, thank you.
Say again, Bill?
line item for garbage pickup?
Is that garbage pickup from the station?
Yeah, it was previously budgeted in, I think the water and sewer line item, and we split that out into a garbage pickup and water and sewer separately. Or water, it's just the name of the account.
So
It's
they're
just
not
water.
flushing their garbage down the sewer, obviously.
We found that it really started filling the bays up, and they didn't put that budget line in there.
You know, one point that I think is interesting is comparing the tuition reimbursement from fire to police.
Oh, don't say that in front of Dad. Come on.
Well, no, I don't. We don't know what that means. And if we're looking at why it is that police officers are not taking us on the offer to reimburse tuition, there's some reason why that is.
Well, there's twice as many firemen, too.
Could be.
You're gonna, I mean, you've got a department of 54 and a department of 30.
Plus, we are talking about the fire department versus police department.
He just tries to
Not,
egg you
not
guys
that
on,
there's
doesn't
any
he?
competition between the two.
Wanted to
Oh,
see
you
if
know,
the
They're
rest-
sitting on two
But I
different
guess the
sides
more
of the
important
room,
question is
right?
anybody is anybody currently using it? Yes? You got one? Have you got any currently using it?
Fire.
Because
So in reality, they each
Working,
have one
you
at this
know, when
point
they're just
using it.
hanging the fire
What was
stuff.
in flexible spending last
Police,
year that
no
we
work
don't
in
need
there.
this year?
That's what I was answering earlier, is that it's all budgeted into group insurance.
Okay.
And if they opt out of group insurance, then we, at mid-year, move it into the flexible spending.
We just won't know until we go through open enrollment. Okay. Anything else jump out at you that you don't feel that bad if you don't catch it tonight?
Right,
You
yeah,
got plenty of time to catch
yeah.
it.
The apparatus emergency repairs almost doubled.
And that's part. Bob, do you want to speak to that real quick because you presented that well?
The emergency repairs,
Yes.
the problem with that is our apparatus is getting older, and it would only take one pump, one transmission to completely wipe out that line item. So that's why you'll see that our routine maintenance is even gone up, is that we're doing a better job of maintaining those vehicles, doing PMs on a regular basis, and watching that a lot closer so we don't have that failure. And these apparatus are getting older, more mileage. We're approaching 50,000 miles on these things. So it's just a wear and tear on the apparatus.
And the actuals are still low, it's just that you're obviously anticipating that because of the aging apparatus.
It would not be unusual for that.
When is our lease?
For that.
It's almost paid, almost paid.
Less debt
Fire
service
station?
payment is, on the fire station?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, they refinanced, we're out several years. Several years.
Bert said he wants a line item.
For this
Get
chair.
him a new chair.
Squeaky chair.
There's some WD-40 or something, man.
Now, is
That
that-
That's
doesn't
on
come
the
out of the
public
mayor
works.
and council budget for
We
supplies. You
rotate
can't
it.
WD-40.
Would that be a point of discussion for capital expenditures to pay off that note then, to save the interest on it? Or?
I don't know that we can,
yeah,
because it was
because Fulton County
certificate of
owns
participation.
it.
So we're making a pass-through lease payment at this point until that debt is retired.
And then we look to,
All right, Moving right along.
And you said about approximately how many years do you think that is?
It's a decade.
A decade, 10 more? So that was a long,
Yeah, they refinanced it. EMS operations is our percentage that we pay into the contract with Will Metro, and that's very self-explanatory. Public Works, I'll let you give it a quick look.
Mm-hmm. 2019 is when it goes out to.
2019? So just 7 more after this. That's
So,
not too bad.
yeah, 3 years short of a decade.
The overhead trimming and gravel road, 30,000 projected, or 30,000 budgeted for this year. That hasn't been spent yet this year, right? It will be done.
Carter?
That's right. We're working on contracting for that.
Low engineering's budget there, and that based, there's no budget there this year. Is that based on an as-needed basis then?
Well, that was
It comes into
Sarah.
play with one of our initiatives to bring on a stormwater engineer to handle those services that were previously contracted to Well.
Okay, so where's that cost?
You'll see it in the initiatives when we get there. It's actually one that results in a higher level of service with the same person and a reduction in cost. So,
All hard decision.
it was tough.
Yeah.
Sarcasm.
I know. Yeah, that was.
Now, the electricity, is that for streetlights? Now, at one time, Fulton County would pay for main streets, but they would not pay for streetlights on any subdivision street. Supposedly was their policy, even though they half the time never got around to actually billing subdivisions for it. Is that still our policy, or is it just on the gated subdivisions that pay for theirs, or what's the policy currently on
Well, the way the code
streetlights?
reads, we pay for streetlights on all public streets, including subdivision streets.
Fulton County's policy at one time was that a subdivision street,
If you all want to open up that discussion, we'll be happy to have it. Although I can, well, yeah. I mean, that's one of those that
yeah.
we've got to be ready to have that one when we have it.
Yeah. That's,
Yeah.
Save that for another night.
I don't think Fulton County ever billed for that.
They were supposed to, but that was, yeah.
That was a nice surprise we got.
Maybe they'll go back and do it.
And just a question on that, knowing that sometimes Sony, I know we're split depending on which utility provides those. I know historically sometimes Sony or GTC, they might go out and start to put lights out, not necessarily because citizens were requesting them, but because we requested them, which obviously could bump up some of our electric costs. And so again, not necessarily for tonight, but that may be another place that we can look at some cost savings, or at least manage those costs, is making sure that we're in communication with the utility companies themselves. And a lot of times lights will go up, perhaps sometimes more lights go up than are necessary, which drives our electricity costs. So we might just want to look at that and understand how it is that they make a determination about where to put those lights in.
They typically won't install those without notifying us first.
Where are our new dumpsters going?
LED retrofit is what we need to do. What?
New dumpsters. Infrastructure dumpster fees?
That was actually, oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, that's our dumpster fee that we keep at the yard. It's our own city dumpster. It's not-
Parkland.
So we use it for public works, brush, debris, litter pickup, everything.
And we don't have dead animals going there anymore, correct?
The
In
dumpster?
the dumpsters?
Yes.
Well, to the park where the dump, or they're going to the
They
dumpster.
go to the dumpster to the landfill.
And how often are those being dumped?
Depends on the season.
I'll just say that because of coyotes and other things, I think we need to think about whether or not we really want to be dumping dead animals and leaving them there for a period of time.
We don't leave them very long.
Okay.
Where are those fees currently being charged?
They were rolled up into the OPTEC RWM line item, and we split them back out.
And I know that historically, and I think this is probably definitely not the case, back when we had a contract with CH2 and Hill, all other cities were dumping their dead animals on our property, meaning the cities. We don't have anybody else's dead animals coming our way, right?
Yeah, I think we're
Okay. Just checking.
When's Sandy Springs Fair may come up?
When's
That's okay.
OPTEC's contract up?
OPTEC's contract, do you know off the top of your head? when it's
It was
ready for renewal?
It was a total 5-year contract, so I think we have three more years on it.
It's renewable on an annual basis, right?
It has to be.
You've been happy?
And it increased by about the $12,000 that, because it looks like it stayed the exact same as it was, but yet we took out 12 and put it in dumpster fees. Is that, did it increase by that, overall by about that 12, or?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
It looks like the OPTEC contract, the budget amount for OPTEC stayed the same, but yet we took 12,000 and put it into dumpster fee and do its own category. Does the contract go up?
OPTEC would have.
Is that based on an increase in the OPTEC contract?
Yeah, there's a 3% escalator on the OPTEC contract.
So that's about
That
the
makes
right-
sense.
That's about the right number.
Increase.
Yep.
Okay.
Parks and Rec.
Currently have 1.5 FTEs.
Two.
If you don't count all the park.
Yeah, if you don't count all the camp counselors.
yeah.
Where's the cost for the consultants on the park master plan? Where's
Capital projects fund.
Okay, anybody else?
A quick question on the building on the parkland. I know that today we've said that it's not in a position to be rented. Is that something that we'll talk about later in terms of maintenance of existing assets?
I'm sorry, I was.
The building on the parkland, on the Birmingham parkland, the home that's there. In the past, I know we've talked about whether or not that might at some point either be a revenue generator for a community facility and/or a place that, whether it be fire police or another employee, or just to rent it to somebody that would help to also oversee that land until it gets created into a more kind of park space. And I know that there's some issues with the house, but is that something that will be addressed in terms of maintenance?
A lot of issues with the house. That house is, when park developed, that house needs to come down.
It'll be the next fire training book.
So it's not, that's just when we look at
What'd you say?
revenue,
Next fire
it's
training
not
house.
more problem than.
It would cost more to open it back up
Okay.
than the value it could derive.
Okay, but you guys have evaluated that in terms of maintenance of assets. Thank you.
Is that listed on your books as an asset?
We don't.
In terms of well, we have liability.
The park, you're showing the IRS.
But I mean, the house, don't we have liability? Wouldn't we have?
Fire insurance.
I think there could be some liability with the home that exists there today.
It's
so-
secure.
So from that perspective, that's why I thought it would be identified as an asset, because it's a different asset from the underlying land that's on that parkland. Just a question for insurance, whether or not, if we don't identify it.
We have identified it.
Okay, thank you. I figured we had.
Okay. Com Dev, and then we're working our way towards the finish line. There's really nothing that jumps out at me.
Budget goes up 140.
You want to, good mention. Muriel, you want to explain where the budget's gone up in the salaries?
For workers' comp?
50 in benefits.
Workers' comp has gone up about $20,000.
Just in salaries, you got 574 versus
$80,000.
451.
That's the difference.
Why is the workers' comp so high for community development?
Oh, okay. All right.
It's a dangerous job. People come after
It's based on the audit
It's-
that they did for us. I'm sorry, she was asking about workers' comp.
Oh.
It's based on the audit that they did for us. We budgeted only $4,900. But you can see it came in at $16,000 based on the previous year's audit. Because we've added another position, which Chris was just going to mention to you. We added a position, which was Tanika. We brought her over from Safebuilt into the Comm Dev department.
To get to 70/30. So it's actually revenue. This is even though it doesn't look revenue positive here, it is revenue positive with an offset in revenues because of the 70. When we went to Safebuilt and negotiated that contract after that RFP, and negotiated the 70/30 split as opposed to the 80/10/10 split that we were on, the additional 20% in revenues outweighs the
put her on payroll
cost of them. They just want to have one or two people in the building, not three.
Right.
So,
How many full-time equivalents do we have in?
We have 10, well, 9. And then there's Cindy.
9
That was another reason.
9
Currently.
point, whatever we call our sustainability coordinator. I don't know that I go a whole 0.5 on it, but 9.4, 9.3.
And that's for currently. And I know you're going to get to it.
It just seems like a lot for workers' comp audit for 9 people, so y'all are doing some dangerous work there.
Yeah, they coded some of our people because they're out in the field dealing with, we have the arborist and code enforcement officer and the
Our first
construction
code
inspector.
enforcement, construction inspector,
Just the
building
anticipation
inspector.
of a potential issue.
If you're out,
Because we don't have any steel workers or anything like that.
Yeah,
so-
but you could see where they would definitely, if you got a code enforcement officer or whatever,
they're-
out
yeah,
on
they're
walking
out.
on different properties or construction, projects or whatever.
I
You
guess
definitely
it's
could have a much higher rate than someone working in an office.
And it's a
Well,
set
they get
aside. It
combat
doesn't get
pay.
utilized. Get benefits.
Not necessarily. I mean, they come in, they do an audit on our salaries or our payroll every year.
Yes.
And based on the salary numbers that they see and the type of classification that they have for the positions, they charge us a
This was an
premium.
actual charge
It's a-
based on that coding.
Yeah, what happens, unfortunately, you do an estimate at the beginning of the year
Right.
and base it,
And
but
based
then
on
they
that.
come in and go through the actual payrolls and code it. So the only thing you can really do is make up for it the next year to try to get it.
I haven't seen many of those audits that result in a
cost savings.
cost savings, yes.
Refund.
Usually because salaries are going up every year.
Well, that, and they seem to always code people in a manner.
Yeah,
that
on the
just-
highest one.
I just wonder if we couldn't, one, you could look at comparable positions over the last 5 years, and have we had any actuals based on those same positions that existed, whether they were CH2 and Hill or ourselves, and then how do those compare to maybe actuals for neighboring cities? So again, it's one thing for the folks that are doing the audit to say it, the other would be, how does that really compare? I'm with you. I think
That's something
that's
Sam would do.
Under the premise that every
$1,700, $1,800 a person.
given that
Sure,
every
these
dollar
are workers'
matters.
comp.
GMA.
And they should be pretty across the board with in their charges. with others.
Yeah, basically, isn't it? X employee is X amount per $100 of payroll. I mean, it's not if you're in Milton or if you're in Johns
Right, that's
Creek,
what
if you're
I'm saying.
wherever.
Where they are.
Uniform rate across the state.
I think it's also somewhat based on experience, and I mean they do have some of the factors that they put into it as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Moving to debt service, that just shows the debt service payments that we have to make in this fiscal year. That $768,348 will retire that initial capital lease
So it will be done in next September?
January.
Oh, next January, okay.
Of 2012.
January of 2012 will be the final debt service payment on that initial capital lease.
Is that on schedule or accelerated?
That's on
That's the
schedule.
schedule.
That'll be good.
It was a 5-year.
Yeah.
Good day to celebrate.
Yeah.
As Bill would say, "Aw, I can't
Next year's
say what he's
budget might be
saying."
fun.
What's that?
It might be.
Yeah. If we can get the additional loss money and get rid of debt service and, we could.
We do have some additional debt service that we took on. That was the new pumper, contender, the fire truck that we purchased.
Yeah.
That's what that 38,963 is.
Yeah, that's nothing compared
pales
to
in
No, that's
comparison.
the lease. I mean,
That's
the
the interest, okay.
So I can tell you
Achieved not that
exactly.
we
I mean, we
What
have,
is
want
it?
to keep reducing those costs.
let's see, for just the principal amount, the pumper is 79,000. The fleet was 682, and we have a Ford Explorer that was also purchased under lease, and that was $6,800. That's actually going to retire as well next year in February.
So it'll be a little under 700,000 that will come off the
Right.
next year's budget.
We got rid of our tan.
Yes. We haven't had to get a tan in 3 years.
Even with last year's property tax fiasco, we still didn't have to do it.
Isn't that amazing, though? For just this one year, I mean, trying to get quick.
Good decisions.
Okay, so then you'll see the transfers out. On the next thing, you'll see the required budgeted contingency.
And just so you know, the transfers out is based on what is requested at this point. And you'll see when we go through the capital request and the capital grant request, that is based on that being funded.
Now, we have never, in our short lifespan, ever had to go into our contingency, have we?
We have this past year to purchase the land that we've purchased.
But that one in that one in the 1% general fund contingency.
Oh, no.
That was in the general
No,
fund,
sorry,
right?
no.
So the contingency is your rainy day for your operating that we have never had to use.
Right.
That's right. Okay, now I want to take us a little bit out of order here from the book, and I want to start with capital projects and then get to the initiatives. So if you'll move forward with me to the capital projects fund. And there will be a sheet after you get to that tab that is colorful about 4 back. It says capital request FY 2012 on the top of it. This is where we're starting with the capital budget at this point. This obviously is subject to some fluctuation if we need to increase or decrease. But as we walk through the columns I'm going to speak from, did you find it?
Yeah.
You're at initiatives. The column I'm going to speak from is the one that's titled Budget Balance Remaining, as well as FY 2012 Budget Requested. And we'll kind of look at those in parallel as we work our way down, because if there's a dollar figure in the blue that's not next to it in the adjacent white, that still means that there is money allocated in that line item. Okay, it just doesn't mean that we're seeking to add additional money to it this current fiscal year. Does that make sense? Okay. So as we start at the top, we've already had the discussion of UASI when we talked about 800 megahertz fees and why I believe it's appropriate this year to go ahead and reduce that line item by $200,000 is for the reasons that I stated before. Future city facilities, that was a renaming of that line that I did this year. If you go back and look at your budget from last year, it said City Hall. These are, preliminary plans, preliminary architectural stuff, the stuff that we might need to get done prior to being able to roll some of the expenses into future city facilities into whatever financing source we choose.
But all planning related.
That's right, and that was a dollar figure that exists in the current fiscal year. There's not requesting any additional money be added to it.
And this is City Hall, this isn't the public safety.
Could be used, the reason for the renaming is because it could be used for either the public safety complex as well as the court. At this point, because of the real world situation, appears to be moving faster than City Hall. So that was why I didn't, with your approval, obviously didn't want to have it tied to a specific facility, since last year at this point we were thinking City Hall was going first. Conditions have kind of changed based on the reality of the world out crabapple. So, we're moving forward on the piece of property that we own full speed ahead because we have needs. to get out of this facility. The land acquisition is an accounting for the acquisition of the land that we acquired in this year. Uniquely, we were able to pay cash for those, and we can have this fund balance discussion as well. Our fund balance started the fiscal year about $7.8 million. We will have made several cash purchases for one-time capital projects out of that fund balance for this year and anticipate the fund balance at the end of the fiscal year remaining about the same. So we were able to actually do some stuff with it even in this year, and it's still where it is, which is, again, another reason why I'm comfortable that we can look at some capital projects this year. That was for the other. Next item was a new vehicle. There was some notion as to whether or not we needed a second pool vehicle. That need at this point, we've been able to survive for a full fiscal year with the one we have and not really have any identifiable need there. So I just don't know that it's worth maintaining, especially in the capital projects fund, a line item as small as $15,000 for a vehicle. If the department finds cause that we need to acquire one, and then we'll go through the initiative process just like we do with everything else. The financial software, you'll see the negative there of $31,196. That is because that project is complete, and that was the remaining balance in the line. So that project was complete at $149,804. Computer refreshes, you can see that's very similar to a vehicle replacement reserve. It's one of those things that we just budgeted for technology to cycle through on kind of a 3-year process, Dave, right? 3 years? 3 years, give or take?
Yeah.
This keeps us on that cycle and keeps our technology up to date.
And is that the hardware and the software? That's just the hardware?
That's hardware. The software was accounted for when we were in the IT budget with the annual maintenance
So
costs.
here we're just dealing with the actual number of expected
That's
computer
right.
replacements.
The police records management software, again, that was an end of project, which is why we reduced the 2651 from it. Vehicle replacement reserve, you'll see that $100,000 represents fully anticipated needs for this fiscal year. The reason you'll see in future fiscal years the 170 next and then 100 after that is next year is the year that original fleet is. We are kind of going to always have until we work out of it, 20 cars that were all bought at the same time and they all hit the road on the same date. So there's going to be 1 year that more cars cycle out than other years, and that is an
I
anticipated
remember it
based
was
on
like at
mileage.
midnight one day.
It's anticipated that next year will be that year when the bulk of them cycle out, which is why you'll see that 1 year difference in the capital planning. We're going to recommend that we close out the line of advanced life support equipment simply because it had $1,000 left in it, and close out that line that was $2,000 for a new vehicle as that was acquired and that was what was remaining. Vehicle replacement reserve at this point in the fire department is funded at $304,000. Adding another $100,000 to that does in fact fund where we need it to be in this fiscal year. We'll see some additional anticipated needs coming on board in next year. This budget comes to you tonight requesting $2 million be put towards pavement management. And that number could increase or decrease depending on if that's a line you would like to stay fairly conservative with based on this request, or if you'd like to add more there, that would be a line that we could do additional one-time capital projects in. We're restriping the existing roads. These are just all programs that have existed and are continuing to exist. Edge of pavement repair. We've reduced a little bit out of traffic calming to bring that line item down to $50,000, partly because we only have one neighborhood that has even expressed interest at this point. We've been having money just sit there with no real people pursuing it. So I don't want to wipe it out altogether. I'm not quite sure how we got to $66,942. Well, I'm sure some expenditures caused us to get there, but if we drop it by $16,942, Carter feels comfortable with that. We'll more than meet the demand that we have in front of us now. Simply because we only have one neighborhood that's even in the pipeline.
Province, Lake,
White columns.
White Columns.
Chris, could you explain the differential in the payment management 2.766 to 1.4448 as far as the budget remaining compared to expenditures for this year?
Are you talking about, we started out with 4.215 million?
Yeah.
We spent 2,766,
Yeah.
and the 1,448 is what's remaining.
Okay.
How much of that are we spending on the pavement we're doing right now? Will all of
The
that be going?
1448 will pretty much go away.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
They're out working right now. Even
Just want to make sure there wasn't money just sitting there.
Oh, no, they're out blocking traffic even as we speak.
Landrum Road Bridge, is that something we're going to go forward with, or do we know what we're doing with that?
We do. We have been holding that in contingency for the Cogburn Road Bridge is the priority. I think what we'll do this year as part of the one of the initiatives that we put forward with the stormwater engineer is we're going to look at a redesign of that, a design build that will hopefully bring those costs down substantially on the Landrum Road
A
replacement.
redesign of Landrum.
That's right.
Because it was really just a big pipe with,
It's actually a bridge, a very small bridge, 12, 14-foot bridge with stone abutments and steel girders, and it's the steel that deteriorated under that bridge.
no, but I mean, the original design they had for it was like, I mean,
It was conspan structure,
yeah.
which is a small bridge structure too, 3 bottomless bridge structure.
Okay.
But with the size that it is, I think we could see a substantial savings on that with the redesign and go into a box culvert type of thing.
Chris, could you speak to the $2 million for the pavement management request this next year as compared to the pavement management plan?
It's the pavement management plan, as you all know, anticipates or projects needs at 2.25 million a year. There's some debate as to whether or not the projection of 2.25 back when that plan was done really relates to 2.25 today. Whether or not the construction when that plan was done, if they were making estimates, the road paving per whatever was 2.25 million. There's some question as to whether or not it actually takes 2.25 to do what they said would get done with 2.25. We've kind of got a priority list, and Carter has it as to what gets done with 2, what gets done with 2.25, continuing to work in conformance with the pavement management plan.
How often is that priority reevaluated?
For every 3 to 5 years, and one of the things that we've got in this year's line item is to go back and do a reevaluation this year of all the roads. We did a reevaluation of the residential streets in-house this year, so we're using that as kind of our baseline. And the main list that was created in the last pavement plan for the collector roads. But we feel that's in pretty good shape. The list of the roads that we're taking off that collector list are the ones that probably are the priorities still.
So the 3 to 5 years are the reevaluation of all roads, and this year we anticipate reevaluating what?
We'll evaluate all the roads.
Oh, all roads, okay.
And are you still looking to do that internally, or does that
We'll-
involve an outside?
We'll bid that out.
Okay. And that 2 million, do you have a sense of, is that within that 2 million, the cost to reevaluate?
It is.
Do you generally know how, of that 2 million, how much would be for that outside survey, I mean, generally
We're
speaking?
budgeting about 75,000 for that.
Okay.
Not about, we are budgeting 75.
And the Hopewell Francis Cogburn intersection, I know we talked about it before, but are the utility relocation costs in that estimate?
We have $100,000 for utility relocations in that budget. That also includes a 10% contingency fee. One of the things about that intersection that is going to be key to it is staying off of the Bell South bank right there. And they've been kicked off. We're looking at the conceptual designs to make sure that we can make that happen. For the most part, the utilities, under our franchise agreements, with the exception of Bell South, would have to relocate at no cost to the city.
Is that right?
When do we expect to actually start the preliminary work?
That could be done
Boy,
as soon as
that's
right
pretty
away.
quick.
Well, we're in design right now. We have
Right.
to have design completed at the beginning of the year.
And we are expecting it to be a roundabout now, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And we'll move forward with right-of-way acquisition probably somewhere around the beginning of the year.
And what about the Bethany Cogburn? I assume that's the intersection right there at the new school.
It is. We're in right-of-way acquisition. Design's complete on that. We're in right-of-way acquisition now.
And that's primarily turn lanes?
That's correct.
Okay. Uniquely, the 880 that's in Hopewell Francis Cogburn is one of the projects that I'm recommending that we do handle as a one-time capital expense out of the fund balance.
You just said 808, the Hopewell Francis, you mean the
880?
560?
No, Hopewell
The
Francis
the
Cogburn.
880, I'm sorry, I thought
Yeah,
you
that's-
said Bethany Cogburn.
Well, that'd be a good step, I feel like.
And best case scenario, I mean, assuming that would get funded, what would be the best case, Chris Carter, in terms of, start to finish? I know you just gave us that update, but what would be the best case if that was funded in terms of when that could be completed?
We've conservatively estimated right-of-way acquisition to take a year and then construction to begin the year after that. But if we can get right-of-way acquired, we could actually get some dirt turned within the year.
You think you'd have a roundabout in a year?
From now,
Yeah, and again, I'm not, I'm
Where?
just generally,
I'll be under construction.
at Hopewell
Francis
Francis
Cogburn.
it would be in process.
My brother said
I thought they said 200.
my niece's school bus has been late to work every
If
day
right-of-way
this week because of the
acquisition takes a year.
intersection.
But it's all contingent on.
School
how
bus has
quickly
been late to work?
acquisition goes.
School bus has been late to work or school?
My school has been late to school every single day this week because of the intersection there, so.
Hopewell at Birmingham, that's also a roundabout, correct? Can't remember.
That's in Birmingham.
Hopewell at
Probably.
Birmingham is not at this point.
That's a T.
It will be one of the things that we look at, but I think we'll have some constraints there.
Okay.
So what do you anticipate, doing with the 77,000?
Just design.
And it's a T intersection, right? Not
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
a crossover.
And
Okay.
I'll just ask this because I actually was having a conversation with somebody in my family about this very thing. Because the turn lane that went in at Hickory Flat in Birmingham, several years ago, it is amazing how that one turn has allowed traffic to flow so much more smoothly. Is that one of the things that you guys are looking at Birmingham and Hopewell? I'll just say it works and it was relatively low cost. Okay, thank you. It's just amazing how that one just lets people go.
You'll see that a lot of the projects as we move into Parks and Rec will be underway this year. This bill, in response to your question as to where is that funded, it's in the capital projects fund for different planning initiatives as well as some trail plan implementation, formalizing agreements with the schools. There's one additional request for 16.5 to be added to Bell Memorial Park in capital improvements in the park.
And then it's offset with HYA fees.
Do you just know offhand, what those, and if there's all these things that need to be improved, what their priorities?
I knew you were going to ask, and I just was going to flip and find out. When it was offset by HYA fees, I didn't really
Yeah, I just know that, a
dive
couple
into
years
it
ago,
anymore
we
than
got
that.
new.
Completion of Phase 2 of the drainage project affecting the area inside near Field 1. Grading, plantings, ground cover, new landscaping, 2 to 4 new dugouts at Fields 1 and 2. Green initiatives including push-button faucets, light sensors for restrooms, concession stand, Bennett House wall ceiling heaters added to restrooms to protect pipes in winter months, Bennett House improvements, interior and exterior projects.
Thank you.
Chris, could you speak to, I know I see $1 million in here for land acquisition and park enhancement for 2013. Why hasn't there been anything anticipated for 2012?
We're going to be designing it.
Because at this point, as far as land acquisition and park enhancement, yes, to Karen's point, the projects will be in design this year. Number 2, to do.
The master planning process would end when, you think?
The master planning process will end probably spring of next year.
All right, and then,
The thing I think you're going after here is as far as doing improvements to the park. To do any real phased park development, we're going to have to proceed down the road of
which takes us back to the work session.
We're going to have to go down the road of funding it, not within the cap. We could put it away $1 million every year for 17 years, and all of a sudden we own a park.
Right.
But for the assortment of reasons, the least of which is that the user should be the ones that, to some degree, pay for the asset.
So that initiative, what you expect would happen next year? That whole initiative to go to the citizens
If,
after master planning?
depending on
process
if that's the
division?
method we choose. You know, we talked about the Parks Authority that night as well, that had the ability to form the intergovernmental agreement with the city to be able to issue revenue bonds that didn't require a referendum. So, you know, there are ways, a multitude of ways. I don't know which one we pick at the end of the day. But if it does require a citizen vote, then we will have to just see what opportunities exist for that. You know, timing. We heard that a November election isn't necessarily the right one to do that type of to go to the citizens for that kind of a vote. So once the plan's done, we'll have to look at the reality that comes out of the back of the plan, figure out what that plan is projected to cost, and then put a plan of implementation in place.
Even just the Birmingham master plan, or really more master plan for the whole city?
Well, there's 3 plans that are coming out of the plans that are being awarded now. So each will have its own implementation schedule to it, and I'm not exactly sure how those will
But in
fall
theory, we
together.
could go after those funds all at once, depending on where those plans fell in terms of, we don't know yet.
We'll have to establish the priority, figure out what our borrowing power is.
Correct.
But you felt like as far as the 3 plans, it looks like we got a 25, 25, and 15. You think we can get them done for?
I believe so. We
$65,000?
haven't opened the cost envelope yet, but those bids are in, knowing what our budgeted amounts were. I mean, we were upfront in our advertisement in going to the RFP process, what was budgeted, and people bid. So I've not seen, when you advertise what you have budgeted, I've not usually seen people come in twice that budget amount. They just choose not to bid on it.
I've seen it.
Have you seen it?
Now the school.
No, I've seen people use every dollar available. I've seen that too, but.
The school IGA, is that for the little park that's going to be next to Crabapple? And
There's one that's called
Northwestern?
Crabapple Crossing Partnership. That's the park I think you're referring to.
$150,000
The
for
school
it.
IGAs are Hopewell, Northwestern, and Birmingham Falls.
Okay.
That's what we're paying for.
And an assortment of different things that are going on there. And we'll have that discussion at some point, but we probably don't need to have it tonight. But that's what that one's.
And what about improvements over here to the Slow Pocket Park that we require?
That we could fund out of the land acquisition and park enhancement. What's contemplated, at least initially at this point, was more of kind of a walk-by bench type environment. I put it on hold after I had the opportunity to see some 1-acre parks in Mr. Rebar's old city, and said, gosh, maybe we need to take a second look at that with some fresh eyes. And you know, the fresh eyes have been here for
6 days.
6 days.
You ready to develop that park?
So let us get back to you on that. I truly didn't know how beautiful an acre could be until I saw one that was developed correctly. An acre can be quite beautiful.
Instead of their standard. Quick question, on the land between Northwestern and Crabapple Elementary, can we, I know that was the dirt was going to be, I shouldn't say overturned, because some of that hopefully is kind of staying green, but what is the timeline on that?
ASAP, although the last I heard, Fulton County had the house listed on eBay for sale.
Okay,
To
so
see if they could get it
Fulton
moved.
County, so it's not
It's
our
in
town.
design. It's in design. They've got to agree to our design.
Okay.
Do you know any more about it than I do at this point?
I'm supposed to get an update to the
On
engineer's
Wednesday.
plans this week.
Thank you.
Any other question in capital projects?
The Arnold Mill Master Plan, is that something we're expecting to do in the next year or two? Or is that something that's going to be, I know we've got $120,000 in there for it.
When I look at which one of the, because we've got several plans in ComDev, Arnold Mill Master Plan, now you see conservation easement program in their architectural code, TDR feasibility is funded. The short-term work plan, I believe, and Tom, please correct me if I'm wrong here, of the comp plan would put probably the conservation easement program in TDR and even architectural code in line ahead of Arnold Mill.
I'm not familiar with the short-term work program and where they show up in there. But to answer your question, I think we probably should take on the RML sometime during the next year.
Because I have, last week I did speak to a couple of the Roswell City Council members, because I really feel like
That's got to be planned together.
It's got to be planned together. So, I mean, it's got to be.
And we've got momentum going on that right now, and I think we probably sometime during the next year, we probably should take that off the shelves.
And is there any other, I mean, I know that they limit the number of grants you can get from certain ones, but is there any other grant money being a joint, because I know they seem to always like cities to go in together for these, to apply for certain grants. Is there any of that opportunities?
Not that I know of. I mean, probably, once we do our study on it, probably qualify for an LCI at some point, and probably get money, grant money out of that. That'll be years out, though.
And just to your point, Chris and Tom, with the TDR, it would seem that order that you'd want to have that TDR feasibility underway before we have the master plan for Arnold Mill, given that TDRs might be necessary in that
We really
area.
sort of need to do both of those concurrently. The TDR program is really
They would need to
important.
roll
The
up.
timing is right for the TDR program and the conservation subdivision, both of which probably are our highest priorities, time-wise.
In the Highway 9 master plan, $80,000 reduction. Could you
Because
speak
we
to
were
that?
awarded the LCI.
That's the part of that.
So
And
it's
the
still
LCI
under-
would address everything in the master planning process, what?
Probably better.
And, okay, and then the Crabapple master plan, the 30,000 was for Lou Oliver?
That's right.
Are we done?
Depends.
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of a,
It was a vision. It was a vision study. Let me think about that, because part of me says we are for now. Part of me says we're not. Part of me says we have other needs sooner than that.
And it seemed like one of the first steps, we were the staff, and I realized that staff can only do so much at one time to prioritize it. I think some of that was that there were still some things that needed to be reconciled from kind of that vision versus what's on the, so there was still some work that could be done internally.
We're working on that.
So my guess would be that that's why. rather
That
than
Tom's
throw
working
more-
on now, even as
We're
we
working
speak.
on resolving the study that Lou did, but also the ARC is anxious for us to submit an LCI request for Crabapple. That'll come with some grant money at the end of that too, so.
But again, I guess that's why I would go back to the point that TDR feasibility would be important in
We need to get
advance
those-
of some of those.
That's our thinking and our way of preserving open space,
we
and
said-
we need to get both of those programs going.
Just seems like we'd have to have the TDR before we could really contemplate some of what might be contemplated within those.
Seems like a lot of things hinge on the TDR program.
Yes, sir. I think citizens would concur.
You'll also notice the required 30% budgeted contingency in the capital projects fund of $101,945. That too, as we talked earlier, is one of those things that we've not had to dip into and consistently allowed it to roll into fund balance for the past several years. I had something come to me as I was sitting here and thumbing back through this. The Community Development Department, I had figured out why that salary and benefit line went the way it was. Is I moved the sustainability coordinator out of the city manager's budget into community development. This part-time sustainability coordinator that we funded last year, which was initially going to be a Keep America Beautiful affiliate coordinator, that we found a way to broaden their area of responsibility and actually enhance and benefit us more. That's what I did.
so it wasn't because of that.
That plays a part of it too, because the sustainability coordinator. So it's both of those, but I couldn't reconcile that our permit clerk got me to that
80,000
number.
So just the movement of that from one to the other.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, that was eating. You didn't know it, but I was sitting there plugging away, going, "I got to look at that tomorrow. I got to look at that tomorrow." Okay, let's look at initiatives, and that'll bring us home for the night, and then we'll have some opportunity to digest this and see where we go. I'll touch on just a couple of them. Stakeholder survey in there. That is something that complies with our strategic plan. That's something that I just had to make phone calls around and ask some survey companies saying I need to do legitimate surveys of particular stakeholder groups. That's a bit more difficult to do than just saying I want to survey all of Milton, because number one, if we're going to survey them for their experiences in being the equestrian community, the residential community, the business community, we have to identify who the stakeholders are to be able to survey them accurately. I started with a big number in there. Initially, what I had heard was somewhere between $25,000 and $50,000 to do those and do them right. So
Where did you jump to, Chris?
I'm on M&O initiatives, I'm sorry. So it's the first sheet behind the tab, M&O initiatives.
And so that would include multiple surveys.
It's going to have to, because I'm
based on
not.
strategic plan.
That's right.
At least 3, based on what you said.
Right, because if we're going to survey, if we're going to determine our success based on each of those stakeholder groups' feedback, it doesn't do us any good to survey the whole city and then us try to figure out which one of the buckets we try to put somebody in.
And I could see some of those buckets could cross-pollinate.
I could too.
And obviously, when we get into developing some sort of a survey, that would be important for those folks, because I don't think you want to have them necessarily in isolation.
Right.
So there may be components that would cross-pollinate, because just for all the reasons that would make sense.
That's right. Stacy talked about the postage machine earlier, and I believe that will more than offset efficiency. Electronic tablet for council, I haven't moved away from that. I've just handled it hopefully in a different manner than as a maintenance and operating initiative. Basically, if that's something that you feel will enhance your ability to do your job, and you'd be willing to allow the paper copies of the agendas to be converted to that, that is something that we will fund out of the mayor and council's budget. We'll start by funding it out of that stipend that exists, just because it's easier for us to track. I've heard from some council that they want. I've heard from council that they don't want. I've heard from some that want iPad. I've heard from some that want Zoom. So we haven't moved away from that. I just want to work individually with you all in the next fiscal year to pick what works for you. And you might want to try an iPad instead of this thing. I don't know.
I was just going to correct the terminology. It's now Google.
Oh, it's a Google?
Google bought
They acquired
Motorola.
Oh,
They bought this
okay.
piece.
What's the cost savings over having a 3-ring binder full of paper every week?
You know, there doesn't necessarily represent intense probably cost savings in the 3-ring binder, other than the paper and the ink costs. The place that we really get the costs are the labor costs, and even more specifically, the time that it takes for us to send an employee, a code enforcement officer, out in the field to drive to each person's house to deliver. So as far as there being cost savings, even if you take away supply cost and just look at labor cost, it's going to pay for itself. Easily pay for itself.
So who's tied to the paper?
You want to get read out, somebody?
I
Oh,
like
you
paper.
do?
And I'll come by and pick it up.
I am now, but they don't deliver mine. It's here.
So after the first of the year, if you want to do it electronically, we'll make it happen. If we're just it's not one of these things that I'm just going to. It's not one of these things at this point I can just push out unilaterally and say you have no choice. So we're going to give choice. So if you want to do electronic, then we'll make it work.
Well, we've got to go all one way or the other
And
now.
everything.
We've got to go all one way or the other, though, and make it cost effective.
Well, if we can, if the ones that want to stay paper are willing to stop by here and pick it up, I think we can still demonstrate that, because that's really where the time commitment is to stick in the field for almost a full afternoon to just navigate 7 places in Milton, in this big city, when you start to go out there and drive it. Continuing down the line, there's not a whole lot as far as cost-wise in this firehouse pre-planned drawing module. There's, as it was described to me, it's something that will increase the efficiency and effectiveness of the fire department and allow them to do what they're already trying to sort of do in the fire trucks by looking at pre-planned drawings within the confines of the firehouse software, which we already have, which is a web-based software program. So these would allow them to respond to things and have a visual of what they're going to before
When they're going out
there.
to locations.
That's right. One of the initiatives I had wanted to work forward with this year, as it related to the strategic plan I elected not to fund, was a multimedia lobby display. We have quite a few people that come to City Hall every day and spend even a snippet of time as they're waiting to conduct whatever business they're here to conduct. Since one of the core focuses of our strategic plan was to build relationships and get our message out, I thought what better way than to have some type of a message on just a recurring type screen. Even if somebody were to sit here for 5 minutes, they might be able to learn something about Milton they didn't otherwise know. I still want to come back to that. I've looked at that just about every year since we've been here. One of these years I'll get to it, but that's what that was. moving down into what's funded, newcomer's guide at this point is a document that's done. We've just reduced the quantity of print documents and would incentivize electronic documents at a $3,000 price. The mobile site development is kind of where you go after you have a good website, is to have a website, since so many people now operate on mobile devices. It's a kind of an add-on to ours that would allow ease of navigating through our site from a mobile phone, whether that's to view our council agenda, whether that's to view the calendar, whether that's to view events coming up. Our site is searchable on the devices that a lot of people use, but it's pretty darn small. You have to know where you're going to be able to navigate it. So on a cost perspective, I thought that was a relatively low cost for the impact. Then the video setup, and this is one of Jason's initiatives that he brought forward at that dollar figure. It's hard not to fund, but what he anticipates doing is to launch an online citizens academy in this fiscal year, meaning that rather than having kind of the whole world is going to computer-based, where at any point in any time a citizen could go to our website and actually learn about a specific department, a specific function or happening going on at City Hall, and at the modest cost, I felt as though it was appropriate for him to explore some of those things. All right.
Jason can do no wrong.
Jason. Let's say police and fire for last. Let's drop down to public works real quick. We're going to do some additional mowing this year. This contemplates... How many times do we mow this year, partner?
We do 4.
We do 4. This adds 2 additional right-of-way mowings. It's our opinion, I don't know if it's yours, that there's a certain characteristic that Milton expects its city to look, and with 4, we've felt, many of us on the staff who drive around Milton have felt we could benefit from a couple of extra. This contemplates that. This also contemplates, we just rolled it all into one line. The mowing necessary on the acre here, the Hopewell property. This allows for maintenance of newly acquired facilities as well as 2 additional mows in a year.
Is that Optech's price on it? Is it their quote?
Yes, it is. Hopewell House
was this based on unit prices that they had in their original contract?
It is. Hopewell House renovations. This was one of those that I wanted to start to cause a line, a placeholder here. To the extent that, you all right, Julie?
I hurt my knee a week ago, and I just did something to it, so that's what that was. It had nothing to do with the budget.
We got Bob.
Nice. Everything to do with my knee.
It's nice.
I'm good. I'm supposed to get an MRI, so just bear with me. I've been doing okay, but I just did something that didn't go so great.
All right, I'll talk fast.
I'm good.
So I wanted to cause a line there to be included. I mean, we've got to this point, the house is in its final stages of being stabilized, meaning that it's in a process by which there will not be anything else that necessarily happens to it to the negative. $15,000. Again, go pick a number. I wanted to pick that at least if there was some planning done on that house, which I anticipate there will be this year, that we could start to pick off some enhancements projects towards getting that thing open. We still do need to have a discussion, and we'll do that at a future work session about what your vision is for that house. This funding might be premature in the fact that we haven't had what your vision discussion is yet, but absent having that discussion, I felt the concept might be lost if at least something wasn't included.
And is it for the moment, if the house has been shored up, it's been
That's
obviously
correct.
maintained, some of those initial things that Carter gave us an update on.
That's
so
correct.
This would be separate from what's already been done.
That's correct.
So if we do open it this year for whatever the use is, even if it's on a limited scale, do we have a certificate of occupancy? And would it be rated for a certain number of occupants?
It's still residential structure. If we opened it for any commercial use or changed the use significantly, we'd have to do other improvements to it.
Okay. this equipment operator, Carter can explain the details behind it if you want him to. I can tell you this was an easy decision to make because this was offset by savings. We talked about stormwater engineer. Again, a different way of doing, a different way of delivering the reality that already exists that represents a cost savings.
Say again on the equipment operator?
The equipment operator is in our gravel roads operations.
That's
We
Terry?
have one now, Terry, who operates the motor grader.
Right.
We have to get 2 others to operate the roller and the water truck.
Got it.
Optech's going to help us out with one of those, but this would give us an opportunity to have the equipment operator as a part-time employee for the roller, so we don't have to rent the roller and an operator. We're essentially paying for that now. So we think we can do it at a reduced rate if we bring them on staff. That's what a part-time looks like.
And where, with that additional savings, where is it in the,
It would come out of our gravel road maintenance budget and capital line item.
Which is why that was,
It was budgeted at 145, and that would take it down to 129.
under capital?
Mm-hmm. So that would take it down for permitted
Chris, is the correlation with the strategic plan on these initiatives, is it in the worksheets? Not the cover sheet, but in the worksheets?
That's right. It's on the worksheets
Okay.
where the top one says strategy, underneath says strategic action item.
Gotcha, they circle that, okay.
And then there's a detailed description, et cetera.
Back to the Hopewell House renovations.
Mhm.
The 15,000 that's given there is not contemplating any kind of repairs that would need to be done to bring it up to code to be commercial, getting more revenue.
Well, it's not, because I don't know exactly, we haven't had that discussion as to exactly what the council's expectations are with it, because
You're expecting to have that discussion
in
sooner rather
September,
than later.
at the work session. Because the question would be, there's a very different level of funding that goes into getting that house open in a similar manner to, say, the Bethel Community Center, where people can go there. That's a very different level of renovation than a level of renovation that goes through deciding that, gosh, we want to try to take it back to match what it looked like in 1840. Those are 2 totally different roads to go down. And I don't know necessarily which one yet the council wants to go down. So again, you'll see there's not a whole lot of writing there. There was no department request. It was one of those things that at the last minute I told Stacy, I said, I just at least need a placeholder. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that I recognize that whatever happens at that facility is going to have associated costs.
So that may
But I don't know.
have to be an amendment then.
It very well might have to be. Okay. If we move into community development, that first one, which is part-time business license, permitting clerk, paid interns, that's a lot of words to basically say over the last year we have had some needs, particularly around the time that business licenses are issued in community development, as well as there was an opportunity we had last year that we really wanted to use a couple of paid interns during the summer because of the value that they provide. And the IRS, and Karen, you can probably speak to this better than I have, it's a struggle to get a free intern anymore. It's almost impossible. And you verge on IRS audits if you start to try. So to the extent that I recognize that there are some times during the year that there's additional help needed, and also to the extent that I'd like the Community Development Department to have the ability, if they wanted to pursue some intern work during the year, that's what that is budgeted for. And that's really going to be one of those things that's driven based on need by the department head. And the rest of them, business license renewal mailing service, that'll kick in October, should help some. And there's a couple of things, flood map notification mailing, community rated system educational mailing, Arbor Day event, not major initiatives.
Notice,
So nevertheless.
heard this morning that the state's going to review their flood maps, and will that, knowing what you know right now, Carter, will that entire cost be absorbed by the state, or we have to pick up some of that cost surveying?
Well, for what they're doing, they're picking up the cost. Our cost is involved with extending that. They're basically reviewing and enhancing work that they've already done in areas that they've already done. We have a second component to that that extends those flood areas up into smaller drainage basins. That's part of our requirement under the North Georgia Water Management District. So they're covering all their costs under that floodplain. The line item you see here for the notification is basically notifying folks of the changes that the state is making.
All right, let's move into the kind of the final parts of the evening, and this is really where I think we have the ability to make a difference this year in the budget if we were going to, outside of highlighting a couple of large projects that we get done. The highlight, if I have a highlight for you this year, is to recommend that we start to, but we actually make a dent into bringing the police department to the level of staffing that is responsive to the now call volume. There's all sorts of ways to look at police staffing allocations. There's formulas, you all know I've got a background in this. There's formulas I like, there's formulas I don't like, there's formulas I just don't agree with. That's probably just more my own personal preference. I don't like comparing us as number of officers per 1,000 people because I think you serve two different sets of 1,000 people very differently. And to just paint a broad brush and say each 1,000 people is exactly alike, I have a hard time going with that. It might benchmark you, but I don't know that it actually gets you good data to staff based upon it. The one formula I do like because it actually takes into call volume and takes into the realities that exist in a police agency is that formula which is endorsed by the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Great organization. They have kind of the industry standard on the police staffing. I don't know if you can call it manpower analysis anymore, since it probably doesn't. They'd probably throw something at me if I call it manpower analysis. Person power analysis. And it takes actual data of your organization and helps to try to figure out where you are with respect to best practice and number of people to have a well-functioning law enforcement agency. I can tell you since we have deployed, our call volume in Milton has more than doubled since 2006. And I don't think that means necessarily because crime has all of a sudden spiked. I think it's the fact that people actually call now and somebody comes relatively quickly. We've got, as you know, needs, or not as you know, but we've got needs in the police department to increase the level of staffing. Right now, there are split between the shifts. 2.5 supervisors, I guess, is the way I'll phrase it to you so it makes sense, that work during the daytime, 2.5 that work at night. The issue that we've got is that we've got days that the supervision staff just isn't deep enough to handle the supervision needs in a police department. That's our first need. The reason that's a need is because that's where your liability exposure is. It truly, if you're going to have somebody that's going to be making decisions on whether to allow something to happen or not to allow it to happen, to say go do this or don't go do this, to step in the event that somebody might be going down the wrong road, you need sufficient supervision from a liability mitigation perspective, as well as to just efficiently run a shift. Having said that, when we were in this, figuring out how we structure this thing, we thought, gosh, let's have a supervisor assigned to each shift, and then let's have one other person that kind of bounces between the two, depending on where the need is. What that has caused is that on any good day, there's one supervisor here, and because of the smaller staffing, that person is routinely fairly busy, meaning that in order to get calls handled in Milton, we just get calls handled in Milton. That doesn't mean that we look down our sleeve and say, oh, I got stripes, I don't have to handle calls. So one of the things that helps to clear that up is to, in our opinion, would be to reclassify a couple of positions to be able to have on each shift a lieutenant and a sergeant. And that allows there to be sufficient supervision and sufficient ability to trade off to make sure that, we're accounting for the times that somebody can't be here because of their otherwise commitment to court or training or vacation, or might end up sick. Or that's one of the things we need to do. The other thing we need to do is we need to start chipping away at getting them up to a staff that we can do more than just respond to 911 calls for service. And we're doing that. So I don't want any of you to think that if you pick up and call 911 that somebody's not going to get there, and they're going to get there a whole lot quicker than they probably did back in the day. But based on the call volume over the last year and a half, we're starting to see hold times increase, meaning that's the time that the call goes into the dispatch center and the time that the police officer is notified of it because they're busy on calls. We're starting to see a little bit of the response time increase, and you might be able to play that off on the fact that traffic is heavier and the roads are more congested during certain points of the day, but that's also an indicator that calls are being held longer than they originally once were. But again, I go back to the fact that the call volume since we deployed in May of 2007 has more than doubled. And that's okay. I mean, that's okay because we all know that largely what the police do is about this much enforcement and this much problem solving. So, people are confident enough to call them because I think they'll come. I'm good with that. Let me pass this out and let's take a look at.
Can I break in for a second too? Is everybody here supportive of adding, more officers and whatnot? Is that a positive thing?
I'm supportive of it. I just want to know how many more we need to add.
Are you expecting the two?
Oh, good.
Are you expecting the two to go to lieutenants, those to be internal promotions, and then 4 new hires?
That's right. And that's just more to shore up the supervision aspect of it. This document is going to help for allowing us to look at the staffing of it. So let me see if I can help walk you through this. And this is actually straight from the formula. We just input our numbers into IECP's formula. So step 1, determine the number of complaints and incidents received and responded to by the police department. And you can continue to read through it all. That says, but that is 15,596 calls for service. And that represents the calls for service after the officer-initiated calls have been removed. Correct? Did I read that right?
Yes.
Okay. What that means is that, let's say I decide I want to patrol Alan's house tonight. So when I get close to Alan's house or Alan's neighborhood, I can get on the radio and say I'm doing a subdivision check at Avonsong. Well, that probably could have occurred without having to get on the radio and saying I'm doing a subdivision check in Avonsong. Now, the dispatcher, being a good dispatcher, is going to input it in the computer and cause a call for service to be logged. Well, we don't need to capture those because those could have occurred without actually getting on the radio and saying it. So this 15,596 are actually calls for service that occurred that caused a police officer to be dispatched.
For what time period?
1 year. The last year, calendar year 2010, as I remember reading the stuff.
You know what, I don't remember. I don't remember if he did it as close to now as he could or if he did 2010.
So is it fair to say that's the number of police-oriented 911 calls or calls directly to the police department that were received from citizens? So they're not internally generated, they're
Those are external.
from the people needing help.
Externally generated. Right.
Okay.
We removed out the internally driven, to the extent that we could, the internally driven things, the things that didn't necessarily need to be captured for the purpose of doing this kind of an evaluation.
Can I ask a quick question? I'm sorry, this is a little bit of a tangent, maybe for another day. On those calls for service, do we have a separate analysis or way to analyze those in terms of those that can be handled internally, versus those that where somebody physically needs to go on site, or are these all where you need to have somebody physically go on site?
No, they are not.
Okay. So obviously it still takes somebody's time to deal with something, but is there a way to analyze those calls, again, separate from budget issues?
Yeah, we could. I could look at
That would be interesting.
theft reports where there's no evidence. Someone loses a driver's license and they need a police report to go get a new one.
Right.
Those
This would be at some point, I think.
Those are
be
things that
helpful
we
information.
can. That Kathy is starting to take walk-in reports. That keeps an officer from having to be dispatched here.
Right. That's kind of my
But
thought. is whether
there's
or not-
also online reporting systems where if it were certain criteria such as a lost license, people could actually get online and do their own report. That would then be checked by somebody.
I'm just thinking that from
So that would save a lot of time.
do some data digging on that. It might be helpful.
So basically, you can, y'all are good with this high level of math. What you work through basically is to figure out what the total number of hours somebody's available, meaning if they work 12-hour shifts, how many unit hours there would be if they worked every day for 12 hours. And that becomes step 2. Then you start to back off from that number when they're off, when they're on vacation, how often they're off to meet the training requirements that both the state and the department have. So you get then your total available hours minus the time away from work gives you to the hours you're available to work, which now puts us down in step 4. If you take the total hours and divide that by the hours available to work, you end up with a relief factor, which means that in order to staff, the easiest way to understand a relief factor is in order to staff one beat for 24 hours per day, you need 2.42 people to do it. It's hard to find the 0.42, so if we just needed one beat staffed 24 hours a day for a whole year, we would say we need 3 bodies to do that. ICP recommends adding 50% of the total number of calls for service to each to reach a total activity count. And that gives us the total activity count to 17,935. Multiply the total activity count by 45 minutes, and that's what, over a course of time, they have determined the average you spend handling an incident. Now that doesn't mean there's face-to-face interaction with a citizen for 45 minutes, but having been there and done that, the amount of time it takes to get there, it does to ask the questions, it does to answer the questions, it does to do what you need to do, it does to get back in your car and power up the computer and write the report and be ready to be in service for the next response. That's about right. That might even be a little bit quick considering the expanse of Milton. You know, if we were 4 little square miles, that number's probably a little bit less. We do a lot of driving in Milton to get from call to call. That gets us to an hours of activity time per year. Multiply the hours of activity time per year by 3, which is preventative patrol. This is another one of those general experience has shown that about a third of an officer's time should be spent on handling requests for service. Other requirements including servicing police vehicles, equipment, personal relief, eating, administrative duties must be taken into consideration. Time must be also allotted for preventative patrol.
Wish you would put donuts.
Donuts, no.
We don't have a Krispy Kreme yet.
It's bagels and latte now. There's no donuts and coffee. Bagels and latte, only the best. Gets us to a total hours per year worked, and divide the total work hours per year by the manpower hours for one unit to determine the total number of units, which is 9.21, and then be able to multiply that by the relief factor to say that's what we need to be able to staff patrol officers now for a year based on our call volume. Now, notice I highlighted the word patrol officers because that's what this function does. That's what it looks at. It's the people that are actually in your department designed to go out and handle the calls for service. Long story short, this gets us, what that 22.28 equals is 23. We currently have 15. This request of 4, coupled with the correction of the supervision deficit, would get us up to 2 supervisors and 4 on each patrol shift, or 16. So if you match this with the formula, that still sticks us over the next period of time needing an additional 7 to come into the difference between 23 and 16 to come into compliance with this formula. Now,
I lost you on the math right then.
Okay.
All right, if we have 15 officers, you're promoting 2, that leaves you with 13, but you're adding 4, that's 17. Where did you lose the FTE?
Chris, that was probably, that's a math error.
Hey, that's a math error.
So
We were talking about 3 people.
I was
So it
wondering
gives
that
us
says,
22.
yeah.
Okay, so 17 and 23. So we're still 6. But for, the reason we came, honestly, this year I've been just tinkering this thing up. I was hoping to come with 1. I looked at the data and formulas and said, gosh, let's do 2. Gosh, now the police department did a phenomenal job and demonstrated the need. I said, this is one of those things that is critical enough. I've got to figure out just how far we can get this thing towards shoring up this gap in this year. I don't want to put words in Deb's mouth, but I think even though the formula shows that we have some needs beyond this year, I think 4 is comfortable.
We had a 2 last year, is that right? If I remember serves me right. Seems like we've added 1 or 2 every year.
I think last year we had more than 2.
So we
But they weren't all
we
patrol
were-
officers, were they? Weren't
We
there
did
some
one
other
in
stuff?
the-
We did a crime prevention.
Right.
Crime prevention, and we've got one assigned to the drug task force.
So we were way down when we first were incepted because of the call volume that we had moved to us from the apparent call volume from Milton County.
Right.
That's right. Well, if you remember when we initially staffed, we staffed to say we would staff at the same
Level.
the same level. We'd actually just fill the beats. You know, so if there were 3 beats, we'd have 3 people. Not recognizing that the volumes would be what it is. Although, if there's any consolation, I've got to tell you, all of the new cities have seen the same trend. It's-
We also thought we only had about 18,000 people.
That's right. So,
Well, and I encountered that. I would call the police, and they never came. They never came.
I never bothered to call them
So
because you
you,
knew they
so
were in
you
town.
got to where you said call them.
Yeah.
Citizens just took things in their own
I
hands in
called
some
them,
cases.
called them one time, and our alarm went off, and I'd already gone back to bed and was asleep for an hour. When they came knocking the door.
We've also added almost 1 body to CID each year. We started with 1, now we're to 4. So that's been some of those bodies I've gotten.
and that's to investigate the crime after it happens. Which there's demands there too. I mean, people demand you show up and handle the call for service, but then they also demand that if their stuff got stolen or somebody got, you know, in a fight, that you have the ability to investigate it after the fact. So, you know, we don't have to. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I can tell you that this need exists in our department.
Yeah, the only thing I want to point out, because I hate for the budgetary point of view to get confused with all this stuff, this $333,000 is a change in annual expense moving forward.
It is.
So
Right.
we're not looking to, I mean, that's something that's going to be there forever.
It is annual and it is recurring. And that, yes, and it comes with all the drama that having annual recurring expenses come with. For the assortment of reasons that we kind of started this meeting with by looking into the future, I am comfortable recommending to you that this is annual recurring expenses that we will be able to and fully anticipate funding in future years. Honestly, fully anticipate funding quite easily. And I then balance that and say, gosh, is that risk worth the reward of working towards increasing the staffing to provide for the public safety? And the answer there is yes.
The local options sales tax negotiation is huge.
It's huge for us.
I have a captain texting me and watching this, and he said we got 1 person last year.
One person.
Is that because one of the people went to the drug task force?
I'd have to go back and look at
That was my, that
My
was
brain is so
justification
focused.
for
And
it.
we
For
were
bodies
careful
that
last
we
year.
sent
I
one
mean,
to
we
their
were
task
careful. I
force, we gave you
remember
one,
the
you
budgeting
stayed.
process,
We
not
never
knowing
ran out.
the economy and everything. We were careful.
Okay. Yeah, we increased patrol staffing by 1 is what the budget from last year said.
Now, does this increase in 4 officers, does that still mean we have 4 beats? Or do
We actually have 6,
on 6?
but that's in the CAD system. There's never 1 officer per beat.
You always create more than you have. So let's say you have a city that's like this that you go and turn into 3s. Well, in the computer, you might turn that one into that one into that. You might, because there's no harm in doing that. You just know that today, even though there's 2 on paper, you're covering both of them.
So does this allow, let me ask it differently. Does this allow us to have more officers on duty at any given time?
It does. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The minimum staffing will go up by 1 body.
Good.
Right now, I require them to have 3. When this happens, I'll require them to have 4. So it's really not going to be any easier on them, scheduling wise, but it's getting there, it's chipping away at it.
And then as far as equipment, cars, et cetera, all
It's all accounted for in the initiative request.
Going back to the lieutenants that you propose promoting, I don't know the qualifications of all of your folks out there. Are there two that are capable, qualified to be promoted, or would you consider going outside the force and bringing in some
I'm
new blood?
confident that we absolutely have two that are capable, have the years of experience. If I will design a process that ensures whoever gets that promotion is qualified, we'll have lieutenants and captains from other agencies come and sit on a board and review their qualifications, their skills. They'll do a big interview. They'll have scenario questions. They'll also have to take a written test. So if we don't get two out of those, then I will have to look at going outside the agency. Because we can't just promote because there's people waiting in line.
Right.
So I will design a process, and Sean and I have already been looking at that, of what's going to be a good process. Because we obviously don't have a big pool.
Right.
So that makes me even want to make the process even that more valid and reliable.
Good plan.
But we do have such a small pool that, at some point, that may be something that we have to look at. I
Last
don't
year,
think we'll have to.
last year the vehicle was actually in the capital project fund. So is this year, is it in here, is it in the capital projects? I just want to make sure we're consistent.
It's in here, but it will go into the
The
capital project
fund, okay.
Mhm.
And what line is it?
If you look at the detailed spreadsheet, it shows a line in the initiative for the vehicle.
Okay. We're on the home stretch here. Fire department. Unless there's any more questions about the police department. Two requests for funding in the fire department. They were both priority one for Chief Edgar. One is to work towards shoring up the supervision in his agency as well. A little bit different of an environment when you have, totally different environment when you have most of your staff working every third day for 24 hours, and then going home for 2 days, and then coming back for a day and going home for 2 days. Bob has created a mechanism by which his manner of attacking this is through the role of bringing on board or officially recognizing is probably the better term. One of the battalion chiefs as a deputy fire chief. That's what this initial requesting does. If you have any specific questions of him as to what that can do for his agency, I can still rattle on longer than you want me to about the policing world, but I'll let that.
So will we be hiring a new person, promoting someone to battalion chief, and then promoting a battalion chief up to deputy fire chief?
I would anticipate that we would seek an internal candidate here before we would seek an external candidate.
Yeah, okay. But then we would hire one additional
That's right.
bottom level and
That's right.
promote within. Okay.
So that's why it's 82,000.
That accounts.
It's not a whole empty. I mean, if you're talking about
It's not a-
promoting someone.
You're talking about promoting somebody and then filling in the gaps that costs.
Increased salary of entry level.
The other thing that we're looking at doing in the fire department, I wholeheartedly support this, is to bring the last of our 4 engines on board as an advanced life support piece of apparatus. We've been working on that for years. The support of that initiative will make every Milton vehicle that rolls out of the fire station, with the exception of truck 1, because it rolls with a paramedic unit because it's co-located in Alpharetta. It's safe to say that every one of our Milton units that responds to a call, whether it's our red truck or Alpharetta's white truck as a part of the agreement, will respond as an advanced life support apparatus, and that's a huge step to get the city to over the first 4 years.
So truck 1 goes with an ambulance.
Goes with a rescue truck.
Rescue truck.
That little red thing you see zipping around town.
Yeah.
And honestly, when feasible, the red truck rolls without the fire truck, because it's a whole lot cheaper to drive a pickup around than it is to drive a ladder truck around. But the citizen doesn't really care what shows up as long as what's on it can help. Just kind of in summary, I know that we've now been through this thing. Well, let me touch on special event fund too real quick, and then I'll be done. Special event fund is where we have budgeted for, thank you, budgeted for the special events this year. I would like to, and I'll just bring this up to you, I would like to have some assistance with special event planning to allow Parks and Rec to continue to do Parks and Rec. Although Stacy and I have found a way, as you're aware, the special events funding comes from the hotel motel tax. I found a way to, and we budgeted in here to have a special event planner assist with some of these events to get them even ratcheted up another level and keep that funding within the special events fund, meaning the hotel motel tax would fund that, and we don't have to look into the general fund to do that. So
Would help if we had more than one hotel.
it would, yeah.
They're out scouting for franchisees to build hotels in Milton.
I haven't heard of any, no.
I thought maybe-
And actually, right now, the market is full of hotels. Every time I say that in jest, the convention of visitors for us, I need more than one hotel. I don't know, maybe get more than one hotel. Apparently, right now, they have enough rooms that if a hotel tried to build anywhere here, there would be some pretty stout opposition from the current hoteliers by saying, gosh, we have enough rooms. We don't need any more rooms. So, one last thing that Stacy reminded me to mention, and I will, and ask for your support here, is with respect to what we do with current employees this year, and whether or not we look towards a cost of living adjustment, whether we say that the adjustment's just this is the wrong time because of the economy. What I propose for you and what's in the budget at this point would be at least initially to watch the revenues to make sure that we have them budgeted correctly. What's budgeted in this document is a 2.5% cost of living adjustment at mid-year, and it's budgeted at mid-year just so that we can make sure that revenues remain strong and we don't end up in a really dip in the recession. What I'd also ask your permission to do is to look at that and come back with an additional report, maybe at the work session in September, based on where we end up with the decreasing costs, hopefully, of our health care program, and if we can maybe find a way to restructure that so that the budget remains balanced, but that we have the ability to recognize and appreciate our current employees, which I think we do. I know I appreciate them, and I know you do too. To the extent that we can show some of that, we'll look at it, but I just want to throw it out there that right now what's in this budget is a cost of living at mid-year, and I'd just like to keep that door open to have a further conversation with you about it in September after we know some more specifics.
Remind me again, I wrote this down from last year, each 1% is
64.
Where, I know you said you took Cindy out of the city manager budget. Where line item of the city manager budget was her?
She was in there. It was some K. It said KAB, KMB. Keep Milton beautiful. It was in professional fees. I'm in the wrong budget. KMB consultant.
Okay. Because I didn't see anything in actual.
She actually is an employee of the city, and
When we
so
went
she's
part-time,
budgeted.
she rolled in salary and benefits.
Yeah.
Okay, so is she in the salary and benefits number up here? Is that why it's over?
Yes.
That's right.
Over budget?
Yeah, and that money, whenever I do a budget amendment, will move up to the salary line.
Okay. Because we budgeted for next year the same as it was for this year. And you said this year did include her salary?
This year, I budgeted what we had budgeted this year with a slight enhancement to do a solid waste management plan and enforcement.
No, but I was talking about just under the city manager.
Mm-hmm. So this once we do the budget amendment, this
Right.
KMB consultant that
Will
shows
go up.
nothing spent
Okay.
is going to go up into salary and wages, regular employees.
So that way we will not be over budget for the year. It will be.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, does she work 50% of the time?
It's on an hourly basis. You know,
Okay.
some weeks I see, 17 hours, other weeks I see 10, some weeks I see 20. She's working against a scope of work, so and she's working against a very detailed list of deliverables, so it's fairly easy to manage, but it's not as consistent as saying it's 20 hours every week.
Chris, how is your workload? I know we cut out your executive assistant or
You've
aide
given
last
me
year.
Well, you've given me a good staff,
And that gave. I mean, that's what we used to give the cost of living to the city staff.
Consistency.
Yeah, right. No, the city has needs, and I think those needs outweigh needs to do other stuff that I've got going on at this point. I mean, given me the luxury of having an amazingly talented staff, so this year I don't have that request. Not to say I won't have a request at some point, but this year there's needs of the city that outweigh that request.
You know, in closing, I just want to say, we all watch the news and read the papers, and not necessarily talking about the federal government, but a lot of other cities, municipalities, issues they're dealing with. We're very fortunate, here with our staff and what they've done and our budgets and things we're discussing tonight. We're actually talking about making improvements and adding to departments. So, we all owe all you guys in the chairs out there and you three here. We certainly do appreciate it. We're in a great position based on our staff and decisions we've collectively made as a council. So it's a good thing.
Amen.
With that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting, and as we talked about, if everybody has time to, get knee deep, and certainly Stacy and Chris can answer your questions.
If anybody over the next 2 weeks would like a one-on-one, please just call me, email me, send a postcard, carrier pigeon, telegram.
Can I ask?
The 7.4 down to 6 for fund balance, that was reflected in the capital fund, capital projects fund expenditures. Where would that $2 million be spent, or in reflected here?
Intersection improvements, the 880, as well as $250,000 to pavement management.
Okay. So it is.
You'll see it off. It's not going to be a place that you can actually go to and say it's project specific. You can probably capture it the closest by looking at the very first page here. Very front of your book.
Very first. Okay.
And these will fill in better as we close this year and can actually bring this ending fund balance from 2010 over to 2011.
Yes.
Whatever number goes in that box under ending fund balance budget fiscal year 2011 will then be reduced by that number that's in total revenues over expenditures underneath the column of 2012. That'll be reflected in the fact that those are capital projects that are used to bring that $7.8 million down to something. And then what will happen at the end of the year is this box, rather than being 7.8, we anticipate something about 6.2,
gotcha.
6.3.
Yeah.
So that's the closest place you probably have it reflected.
Okay.
The computers that we currently have, that some of us still currently have that aren't being used, do we just need to bring them into
Please.
you?
Yeah. We'll figure out where they are in the refresh system, and we'll
Because
handle them
they
appropriately.
really have had very little activity, but
Yeah, absolutely.
And other things, just as we progress through this process, other things that have been discussed, either that are not responsive, there's questions of, just email, phone call.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.